首先，我们很荣幸邀请到 Darwin Schweitzer, Big Data and AI Advanced Workloads Lead of Worldwide Intelligence Cloud at Microsoft, 为我们带来 Artificial Intelligence Changing the Game for Everyone. 让我们掌声欢迎主讲人 Mr. Darwin Schweitzer. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AI today, and particularly how it is changing the game for sort of us as technology people, as well as individuals as well. But we're going to focus in on a lot on the technology pieces. So for me, when I think about changing the game, I always think of games. And for me, this time of year is always interesting because it's the end of the NBA basketball playoffs, and it's also the end of the National Hockey League playoffs as well. I grew up in Northern Canada, and hockey and basketball were both big sports and games for me growing up. So one of the things that I don't know if many of you are familiar with, John Wooden was the coach of the UCLA Bruins in college basketball for a number of years. And just to kind of use as an example, he won 10 national championships. He had some very good players as well, but he won 10 national championships in a 12-year period. And his main change to kind of changing basketball as a game is he would actually put other teams into a zone press and basically make the defense an attack mechanism to basically make an offensive defense type of thing. And so this is an example of, in the game of basketball, how John Wooden basically changed the game. Another gentleman, and I'm actually too young to see him in his heyday, but Gordie Howe, who's known as Mr. Hockey, he played it for about 25 seasons in the NHL, and then in the late 60s, early 70s, he retired for a couple of years, and then he actually started playing again at the age of 46, and actually was a professional player and played for a total of 32 years as a professional hockey player. The way that he changed the game, which is really interesting, is Gordie was a very good offensive player until Wayne Gretzky broke his records. In future years, he was a high goal scorer, but he was also an enforcer. So he actually made his own space. And so he actually created space around him so that people couldn't, he had more time to pass the puck and shoot the puck because everyone was kind of scared to go near him type of thing. He also, since we're talking about changing business, he actually changed the business of hockey. When he played for the Detroit Red Wings, he was not paid to to the level he should have been paid for the type of player he was. And when he went to the WHA, he became one of the first $1 million players, and actually sort of made this future salaries for players much better. And he played until he was 52. And so he definitely changed the game, and he just passed away a couple years ago. So another one, and this was a slide that Satya Nadella used at Build this year, and for me, every time I go to New York City, I always visit the Flatiron Building. It's one of my favorites. I've always wanted to kind of, have an apartment in the corner up here or something. It's really a tremendous building. So this is the Flatiron Building in New York City in approximately about 1905 is what they think, and you can see on the street, there's people, there's some horse-drawn carriages, looks like there's some trams as well. It's hard to tell if they're motorized or if they're horse-drawn. Looks like they're motorized. Now, this, in the sense of the Industrial Revolution, if you just jump forward 20 more years and sort of look at the artifacts of the Industrial Revolution, the cars, kind of coming from Henry Ford, all of the trams, and just the total change of this. You also notice there's some advertising, Perfect Gum up there on the top, up by the 20. So you're actually starting to see advertising on the buildings as well. So this is kind of before advertising on the web. This is like advertising, up on buildings. The thing that's interesting about this is if you look at sort of the Industrial Revolution, and I just rode in from my hotel this morning on the MRT, and you can kind of see the examples of this. But you look at some of the gentlemen that were sort of renowned for what they did with electricity: Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, and then I was planning to give this talk in Miami back in February or March, and didn't get a chance to do it, so I had a lot of time to think about it. Found this excellent, when you start looking for things, I was watching, I was on Netflix, and this PBS documentary was on, and it was a documentary about Frank Sprague, and he was the guy who actually took a lot of the electrical ideas that the two gentlemen on the left sort of were renowned for, and he actually created the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and Boston got a subway back in 1897. And unfortunately, the Boston subway still seems, if you've been to Boston, they don't have the nice things in front where the doors open up and they protect you from falling onto the subway. It's a little bit more 100 years old. And I think the MRT actually rolled out about, I think maybe 99 years after the Boston subway did. So, but it's an amazing subway system. But what Frank Sprague did is he actually created an electrical engine that could actually make subways and train travel and using electricity possible. And he started in Boston, and of course, other subways were created in the US and around the world. Now, if you kind of look forward and you look at sort of gentlemen that are big in the AI space, Andrew Ng is, of course, was a co-founder of Coursera. He worked at Google for a while. He's sort of one of the gentlemen that are sort of known in the AI deep learning space. There's others in Toronto, Montreal. There's a lot of other deep learning specialists, and some of them work for Microsoft, and some of them work for Google, and other ones work for Facebook. But Andrew talks about AI being the new electricity, and if you look at that picture from 1905 and then say 1925, and you can see the changes in the Industrial Revolution and the things we take for granted with electricity, being able to keep our phones and our computers running. This is very telling, and this is actually a great session that he did at, I think it was at Harvard or MIT, where he talks about the premise of AI as electricity. So I would recommend that for something to watch. So going forward on that, so talking about changing the game, one of the things that has been found is organizations that take data, cloud, and AI and put those together tend to perform better than, say, companies that are not using that. And for me, machine learning and AI, sort of in a typical IT scenario, say when I started my IT career about 25 years ago, DB2 on the mainframe and different tools like that. AI was around, but it was not something that was sort of running a lot of things or even that available. But now, if you kind of look at this aspect, and again at Build and so forth, Microsoft talks about intelligent cloud and also intelligent edge. And Ted gave a great presentation yesterday on sort of IoT edge devices and looking at edge devices. But we're going to focus in on, of course, on artificial intelligence here, and sort of the combination of the cloud and AI running on the edge, and in the cloud, sort of event-driven architectures, which are more prevalent today, serverless technology, different things. This really makes the opportunity for you as a developer or your company to actually go and change the game. So for me, it was interesting. Last summer, I was involved in this thing. We have a thing called Project Signal, where we're looking at AI developers. And in last July, it seemed like even though machine learning and deep learning are part of AI, and really deep learning and neural networks is technically sort of under the machine learning umbrella, it felt like, especially with a lot of the services and a lot of the videos that come up, and with translation and so forth, that's deep learning that's running a lot of that, making a lot of that possible. And but in general, you can see deep learning, machine learning. These are not brand new technologies that have been around for a while. Deep learning and sort of the advent of things like the GPUs and massively scalable cloud infrastructures have made a lot of this much more doable today. So the things I want to focus in, and the first thing is sort of this idea of a classic sort of traditional company, which I've worked for a lot of those in my career, and then also the scenario of a cloud-born company. So we're going to look a little bit at that on the next slide. We also want to talk about changing the game for your customers and you as a customer, partners that you work with, and also employees. So a lot of the times, and we'll take a look at a bot that's sort of a chat bot, which is in the insurance scenario when I do a demo. A lot of bots are being used maybe sometimes internally first for employees, and maybe helping employees serve customers as an example, helping customers change their password more efficiently, helping the employees being able to find out who's in their organization and so forth. So we'll show you the who bot inside of Teams. But then also for developers, data engineers, data scientists, there's a lot of pieces in here that we want to look at. So if you look at sort of the classical analytics, which was more of a transaction-driven sort of relational database scenario, you had applications and potentially web applications or desktop applications running. The information was being stored in an online transaction processing database, and the relational databases were sitting on top of storage, and that was kind of the way that individuals put information in through their devices or through the web and so forth. And then on the traditional classic analytics side of this as well, you had storage, you had ETL, which stands for extract, transform, and load. MPP is massively parallel processing databases, which are essentially scale-out relational databases. And then OLAP, analysis services, being a good example of an OLAP technology. And then dashboards and analytics and reports on top of that. Now, if you look at some of sort of the new cloud-born analytics companies and sort of this more event-driven than transaction-driven scenarios, you'll have a company like Pinterest. And some of this ideas, there was a gentleman who was the architect at Pinterest that actually talked about some of this. And sort of the scenario here is that if you're a company that's born in the cloud and you, of course, are using a lot of apps and potentially IoT in this as well, and you've got NoSQL and the ability to take NoSQL and have a globally, sort of this database which is spread out. You don't have to shard it. It's kind of naturally done for you. And then on the analytics side of this, things like big data storage like Hadoop distributed file system, Hadoop, Spark, and then streaming and things like languages like Hive and Scala and Python, which are used in the big data world, as well as AI, dashboards, and analytics. So those are kind of the two worlds. Now, this was David Kakin, who's the chief architect at Pinterest, that was talking about this over at Microsoft earlier this year. The thing that I find interesting here is if you look at, and these things are not mutually exclusive, and so you may have this on-prem, the stuff I have in green, you may choose to move that into the cloud, and you may have some of the stuff that's on the bottom as well, but you may be a company that's sort of classic, both on the OLTP side and the analytics side, and that's sort of where SQL Server, database, data warehouse, analysis services kind of resides. And if you look at over there on the bottom, sort of a Cosmos DB and using a lot of the programming languages, both Microsoft and open source languages on top of those technologies. And then Databricks. And later today, I actually have a couple of things. This is a four session day for me today. So I have this, and then I have a couple of workshops, one that's on machine learning, deep learning on the data science virtual machines, and another one which is using Azure Databricks. So hopefully you have a chance, if you're interested in those topics, to attend those. Now, how does this work as far as like with transformation? And so let's say I'm at a traditional company, or let's say I'm a cloud-born company. Let's as an example, we'll use Pinterest, since I had the gentleman that was the architect there on the bottom. Pinterest, as they become a more formal company, even though they may have everything that's here on the bottom, eventually when they get a CFO that wants to, do the books and make sure that everything's being reported to Wall Street and everything's good, they're probably going to go buy a Microsoft Dynamics or an Oracle Financials or an SAP, and so they're actually going to buy some of that stuff that's on the top, and that it may still be in the cloud, but they may use some of those architectures on the top. You also may have a scenario, let's say in Seattle we have Nordstrom's and we also have Amazon. Amazon does retailing and does clothing retailing, and Nordstrom's.com may have to move from sort of their classic stuff that they may have on top to using some of the cloud-born aspects just to be able to compete with a cloud-born company like AWS, or like Amazon, I should say, not AWS. And then you may also have a scenario where you're doing a sort of a business vision transformation where you're going to maybe have to move in both directions. So you may sort of be redefining the business that you're in. But the thing that's with cloud and AI and data is you sort of have this scenario to be able to do these digital transformations or do these transformations to be able to compete in the world, similar to the way that Gordie Howe and John Wooden have in their given games as well. So let's start a little bit with what's known as Microsoft's at the modern data estate. And so you sort of have this scenario, and this is, of course, a hybrid as well. In my Databricks session, I'll talk about this as well. I started on SQL Server 6.5, so back 21, 22 years ago. And SQL Server has been an amazing tool. And for me, more than 2 decades ago, it was something that was key to my career, and it still is. Now, I think if I had the same opportunity to learn both SQL and another tool, I would look at a tool like Azure Databricks. So Databricks, I think, is that tool, especially if you're on the analytical side of things. There's sort of this great scenario for that. So you could have operational databases and data warehouses on SQL Server and other technologies in your on-premise data centers. And of course, you could have operational databases, data warehouses, data lakes, and so forth up in the cloud as well. And of course, there's going to be scenarios where you're going to want to move data, and an analytics scenario may be the one that you're wanting to do for your business. So here's an example here. So this is kind of a left to right architecture. You've got log files and sort of the new data sources that are not in the traditional data warehousing and business intelligence world. You've got custom apps and as well as sort of your structured data. And you can kind of see the scenario here where you have data, coming in, landing that data in storage, putting that into databases, using a product like Azure Databricks to process maybe web logs or JSON files coming from IoT devices and being able to stream that. And that data could go into a Cosmos database and go into other applications. And it could also go into more of a standard data warehouse as well. And again, you could use tools like Power BI and Tableau and other tools to be able to interact with that. So if we look at, so that's sort of the data side of this. Now let's look a little bit about AI transformation and the different things that are happening. Like I remember last year, this is the third opportunity I've had a chance to come and be at this event, and we've done hackathons, I think, last year and the year before that. I don't know if there's something like that now. I don't know. There isn't. But you guys were doing bots like a year ago, and we'll say before we were doing bots, from an aspect of myself, I didn't know that bots were as popular and definitely as popular as they're becoming. So you look at digital agents, you look at things like your phone assistant, things like bots, and we're going to look at an insurance bot scenario here in a bit. Also, this idea of intelligent apps, and so if you think about a scenario, you've got an application that runs on your phone or runs in your browser or on your workstation, and the chance to take AI and infuse that into the application to make it much more rich than it was. And I think in some of the videos, and we're going to actually do currency detection in the data science deep learning scenario later, where you actually build look at images of currency and actually be able to determine whether they're a US $1 bill or a $20 bill. And so that's what the Seeing AI app does, but we're going to look at some of the things on the back of that. But as you can see how that helps people that are visually impaired to be actually able to in the video, the gentleman that has a son who has no seeing disability, and he does, and being able to use the Seeing AI application to do that. Also, this is a scenario of business processes. So early on in that slide where we had the sort of the classic and the cloud-born businesses, sort of this whole idea behind digital transformation is actually transforming business processes, and the ability to be able to do that in a way that maybe makes your business more competitive than your competitors in the space. And so this is a piece here. So in this slide, the expect would be 95% of customer interactions will be powered by AI bots, including telephone online by 2025. And if I think about, for me, I've actually used Progressive Insurance as my car insurer, and the demo that we're going to look at here next actually is an example of something that was done for Progressive, and then they actually have working live. So I'm going to just bounce over, we're going to go away from this, and let's actually look at a demo. Okay, so this is a bot that which is again this fictitious litware insurance. Microsoft always likes to, it's either called, there's always a fictitious name to the companies, and litware is one that's being used quite frequently now. And so I can actually, I have 3 kids. They're all older now, so they're not on my car insurance anymore, which is good. But in this example, we're actually going to look at this. I'm going to say, hi, I want car insurance. And again, you can talk to this as well. I'm choosing to type in this case, but there is multiple channels to be able to interact with this. Let's see if it's happy or not. I may have to hit a refresh. Let's do this. It's the issue with leaving it sit. Right, there we go. All right, so I'm going to say, hi. Okay, and I'm going to say, I need car insurance. And basically the bot says they can help me with my automotive policy. I'm sorry, it's actually not too bad on the screen. You should be able to see it. I'm going to say, yes, I'm an existing customer. And it's going to ask what my full name is. Now, this is actually Ted Way's, in Ted Way's organization. So Lance Olson is leads some of the AI teams at Microsoft. So I'm going to say Lance Olson. It's going to ask me if I want to use smart authentication, which again, I can either use voice and sort of keywords for this. In this case, I'm going to say no. And I'm just going to type in my password and hit enter. And so now it's going out. Now this bot is actually going and checking against the system. So it goes into, in this case, let's say this was Progressive Insurance, it would go back and check to see things about my profile. Do I have any kids? Am I married? How many cars do I own? Those type of things. And it's going to actually bring that data back. So it found a policy. It says, and again, it's my daughter's birthday today. It's the 29th here in Taiwan. Her birthday's on the 28th, so it's actually, but she's 22 years old, so that's no big deal anymore for birthdays for her. And so I'll say, yes, I do have a 17-year-old, and you can see this is actually a picture, that's actually a real picture of Lance Olson. It's going to ask me what type of car. Is it a sedan, an SUV, or a sports car? I'm going to say it's a sedan. From there, it's going to say what make of car, and I'm going to say it's a Ford. And then it's going to ask me for the model, and it's actually a Ford Fusion. And now it's going to ask me what year it is, and I'm going to say it's a 2015. This is the year of the car. And now it's going to ask me, do I have a picture of the car? Because maybe it wants to actually make sure that it is a Ford Fusion, or maybe they want to make sure that that the year is correct or if there's a dent in it or something like that. And so I'm going to actually go here, but I'm going to kind of throw it a curveball. I'm going to actually put a picture of my wife's dog in here. So this is Hudson. So this is my wife's dog. He's and so basically, if I scroll down, it says no. That doesn't look like a car. That's a dog wearing a costume. So this is actually my wife's dog. During 4th of July, she got him all done up, and he has wearing a bandana. So it says, no. This time, really put the real image in there. So let's actually put a Ford Fusion in there, so you can see, that vision and that image recognition, in this case, helping the insurance company out, so I'm not, insuring my dog. It tells me that it looks like a nice purchase. Again, usually you do insurance transactions when you're buying a new car. So think you have a 17-year-old daughter, and they need a car. My daughter got a much older car than in 2015, but because you always know they're going to run into something. And then from there, it gives me a rate, and I'm going to say, what do I think? I'm going to say, no, too expensive. And the beauty of this is now I can go from the bot, and it should be able to give me a live person. So it actually has a live person now joining the call. So now you can think there's Jane is going to help me. They have the capability of being able to use other tools. Like, for instance, they're using Power BI, and they can bring up a dashboard of insurance in the area, and there's different aspects here. This is essentially another tool that could be used. They can also have this integrated with the CRM system as well. So this is dynamic CRM. I've actually already logged on and to one of the sessions. You can see the chat. This is a previous chat, but you can see the chat that was there, and so this actually allows the bot to deal with the early conversation, but when it gets tough to the point where maybe as a customer I'm going to churn and go to a different insurance company, or I need taken care of, and then they can decide whether they should give me a cheaper rate or a better deal, those type of things. And so you can kind of see how those tools go together. So that is a good example of an insurance bot. So I'm just going to start here on this slide. So and the interesting thing here, and Progressive actually has this bot. So Progressive Insurance has a lady, her name is Flo, and so there's a bot on Facebook Messenger, and you can actually log on to the Flo bot and actually have a very similar type of experience as you saw there in the Litware demo. And so what they're using this for is a lot of millennials, like my kids. It's a way for them to actually interact with people that are sort of tech savvy and sort of non-traditional customers that maybe don't want to talk to an agent and want to look at it in a different way. So putting the bots in social media where the millennials are, and then in the case of Facebook Messenger and the demo I just did, so you can see here's Flo. She does their commercials, and then on the web, you can see. And here's a quote from them saying, by using Microsoft's Azure Bot Service and Cognitive Services, they were able to essentially create this service that's used. And just some more quotes, and you guys will have access to these slides. Another scenario where bots are often used, and because maybe I was talking to a hotel chain a month ago, and they didn't want to use bots with their customers, but they wanted to use bots with their employees, because essentially you have an issue where, let's say I'm working at a hotel, and I've been there for 30 years, and I know everything. I know every light that goes in and so forth. But if there's a brand new employee that's maybe a year into work or just starting brand new, if they have access to a knowledge base and they can go in and go into a bot, you would be able to get some of those details, which are kind of in your workforce, your more experienced workforce, and actually make it easier for them to onboard. Also, in this scenario, and what the hotel chain wanted to use it for is using bots to help their employees actually help the customers. So they were still directly interacting with the customers, but the bot was making life easier for them. the next thing I want to show, and I asked Ted about this yesterday, since Lance is in the, and that's probably the one thing I forgot to open was Teams. I wanted to show you guys the WhoBot, because at Microsoft, one of the challenges always is trying to figure out what organization people are in. We'll wait for Teams to open up. I should have opened up. But there's actually the ability to go into Teams and enable Who as an application, and then it'll actually go out and look at your Active Directory and actually show your organization. So let's just wait. Teams is opening. We'll go into Who here, and we'll get a look at this. How many folks in the crowd have had a chance to use Microsoft Teams at all? Just a show of hands. Okay, some of you have. So I actually really like Teams for some of the aspects for communicating with stuff. So we can see here in the WhoBot, I put in Ted's name earlier, and if we were to go and click on the organizational hierarchy and sort of scroll up, you can see here's Lance Olson right here. And so basically, let's say that I wanted to find somebody in Lance's organization, in the case of Ted, to be able to talk about FPGAs and IoT Edge and so forth. I would be able to, find Ted, know that he works in Lance's organization, find other people that may be involved in cognitive services or Azure ML and those type of scenarios as well. So anyway, so the WhoBot inside of Teams is definitely something I use inside of Microsoft on a fairly regular basis. So let's talk a little bit about intelligent apps, and I'm going to briefly show the JFK application that Ted talked about yesterday. Also, I would recommend, and I'll have a pointer on the slides, if you want to go out to the GitHub site, you can actually, with an Azure account, you can actually deploy the back-end services into a resource group and actually deploy something like the JFK files, and so we'll have a little bit of look at that as well. So in this scenario, and at Build this year, the MBA actually has an internally facing intelligent app like sort of the JFK files, but it's going to be used inside of the MBA, and so it won't be customer facing. This is used for MBA staff to essentially look at video of LeBron and various things and be able to kind of control all of the data feeds and be able to find things and so forth. But there's some articles about it, but it will not be a publicly facing scenario. But the team that helped the MBA with this application is the same team, the cognitive services, cognitive search team that actually did the JFK files. So we'll just look at this demo very briefly, just looking at the time. But there's a GitHub link here. If you're interested in it, click on that, and you can actually go out and deploy your own JFK files in a smaller sense than this on this application. So just to come back to this one. So this is the JFK files. And so you can see here I searched for Lee Harvey Oswald, who, of course, was the gentleman known to assassinated President Kennedy. And this is actually sitting on top of real documents. These documents are actually sitting, and if you come to my session on Databricks or on the data science, we'll actually look at some of this. The images are actually sitting up on a blob file, and then the services are actually going through, and Azure Search is indexing it and giving you this capability to basically go through these documents. There's also sort of this graph capability where you can actually look at Oswald and then see the relationships that Oswald has with, say, Jack Ruby as an example, or Sylvia Duran as an example, who was a contact at the Cuban embassy, I think. And so there's ability to essentially use this and interact with it. If you click on this as well, it'll take you out, and you can kind of see what the architecture looked like back in the day. And then if you're interested in the source code, you can find that from here as well. So I would recommend, if you want to look at an intelligent app, that is a good place to start. The next thing that we want to look at is, because one of the things we're looking at digital transformation is transformation of business processes. So I've had the opportunity to work in a bank, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in technology, I've worked in retail, I guess. I used to work for Expedia. I work in banking and financial services. And so those are kind of, actual industries, which are kind of the industry verticals on the top. And then, of course, you have sort of horizontals. And for me, data and analytics and BI is kind of a horizontal that goes across companies and kind of a horizontal that goes across some of these parts of a company as well. But companies usually have, sales, marketing, customer service, HR, finance. And in these scenarios, you may want to use AI in a part of your business like finance. In this example, this is actually available. There's actually a machine learning package for forecasting. And one of those scenarios is financial forecasting. Now, Microsoft, for its financial forecasting, actually uses machine learning to basically do predictions of earnings and so forth. And it's been super popular at Microsoft. Amy Hood, our CFO, is super happy with it. So if there's a scenario where, in the case of the customer I talked to about a month ago, they actually sent their finance people to Microsoft for an executive briefing, and I talked to them about using this to basically do digital transformation of their finance department and basically giving ways to make the people that work with budgeting and finance to essentially be more productive in what they're using. Want to talk a little bit about the AI platform. And so as an example, just kind of as a little bit of an advertisement for my other sessions today, we're going to be looking at the data science virtual machine, which is essentially there's a Windows and a Linux-based virtual machine that has sort of everything you ever wanted in sort of ML and deep learning and other tools that are available. Spark is actually on the Linux data science virtual machine. I'm also going to talk about Spark, and Microsoft has a couple of flavors of Spark. There's Spark, which is part of HD Insight, and then just in the last 3 months or so, Azure Databricks went GA as well. Now, I'd mentioned, I use SQL Server 6.5, and it was super helpful for my career, and I think a very good tool. And I really think that Azure Databricks would be that tool for me as well if I was, and looking at analytics as something that was going to, I was going to bring to my company and help pay the bills for, decades to come. So you sort of have, this, and what we talked about, cognitive services, sort of the intelligent apps pieces of that, which is your pre-built artificial intelligence, conversational AI, like the bots, like we just saw with the example of the insurance bot. In the session we're doing with data science virtual machine and the deep learning virtual machine, which will either run on CPU or GPU machines, that actually incorporates Azure machine learning. And then on the deep learning side of things, or sort of on the code IDE side and the deep learning side of things, you can see the various frameworks, things like TensorFlow, Caffe, the Cognitive Toolkit, which is Microsoft's, TensorFlow is Google, Caffe 2 actually was done, some of the newer stuff was done at Facebook. And then what I am a big fan of is the Visual Studio tools for AI, both in Visual Studio as well as in Visual Studio Code, and just some of the aspects there. So in the data science workshop today, we'll talk about some of these tools. Some of those tools, as an example, notebooks. How many people have used Jupyter notebooks before, or some type of notebook service? Okay, so this is sort of Jupyter, and of course, Jupyter stands for Julia, Python, and R. And essentially, you can write R code, you can write Python code, you can write Julia code. In the case of Databricks, Databricks has, you can actually write Scala as well as Python, Spark SQL. And so there's sort of this capability to write code in cells, put markdown in cells to be able to explain it, and then you can actually execute these notebooks to, which is what we'll do for the deep learning example, and we'll also use the Databricks notebooks in the Databricks session later today as well. Visual Studio tools for AI, lots of good scenarios here. Also in the currency detection aspect that we're doing, we're actually doing some of that inside of Visual Studio. So we'll, and there's a, to get everything finished in an hour, I think is going to be super ambitious, but there's a GitHub site and you can take it and complete it when you have more time as well. So I talked a little bit about the data science virtual machine. So if you look at some of the sort of the underpinnings of infrastructure for AI, data science virtual machine has tools built in. You've got deep learning tools. You've got, as I mentioned, the ability to use all these different languages, C# and Julia and JavaScript and Python and R, et cetera. And then also, there's actually, on the Windows version, there's actually a copy of SQL Server. And there's also Jupyter Hub, so you can actually use Jupyter Hub on it. And actually, on Windows, there's Visual Studio 2017 as well, which saves you from having to install it like this afternoon. If you didn't have a machine that had Visual Studio, or you had a Mac as an example, you will be able to use a virtual machine up on Azure to be able to do that. And then on the Linux flavor of this, it has a lot of other Linux-only tools. In the deep learning space, as an example, there's lots of Python-based tools that maybe only run on Linux. But we'll explore those in the session this afternoon. Things that you would use the data science virtual machine for, as an example, let's say this laptop right here. 2 years ago, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and we went into a soup and salad place, and somebody stole our laptops. So they went into our car and they stole our laptops. The beauty of this is I can take any laptop at a customer or somebody else's laptop, and I can actually log on to that virtual machine, and I have that machine up in the cloud, and I can continue, as life goes on, type of thing. As an example, today we'll be using it for some training and education. And then also in the down in the lower middle there, the ability to use a GPU machine, use a Linux GPU machine, being able to start with a smaller machine, maybe see if everything in your deep learning scenario is running correctly, and then being able to scale that up and pick a bigger GPU machine, and the ability to be able to turn that off so you're not having to pay big dollars for a GPU machine, or actually have those machines installed inside your company. So those are some examples that we'll look at. Wanted to show, actually probably just enough time to show this on the video side of this. I want to show one video on seeing AI. And this is the stuff we're going to take a look at.
Identify currency bills with Seeing AI.
One of the things that Seeing AI can do is recognize currency bills. Currently, we only do US dollars. This is important because US currency is all the same size and even the same color, so it's hard to differentiate. What some people will do then is fold it into different shapes or put it in different parts of your wallet. But to do that, you still need to go through and identify each of the notes. You can do this with our currency channel. Simply place the phone over a note and hear the denomination. It's lunchtime here, so let's see how much money I have here. I'm just going to put the phone over the bill.
$1.
$1. Unfortunately, that's not going to buy much today. Let's see what else I have.
$20.
Cool, $20, that's more like it. You'll see that this is quite a nice $20 bill. What about if it was all scrumpled up? Let me do that for you. And let's see, it looks a bit older now. So let's see what it's going to say now.
$20 US.
Cool, so just as fast, it's recognizing notes which are maybe not quite so pristine. That's currency for you. Let's go and get some lunch.
Microsoft logo appears.
Okay, so I'll sort of conclude at this. Now, the thing that's really interesting for this is that I used to be a data architect at a utility in the Seattle area, and one of our top developers, his name was Andy, and he was seeing impaired. He was blind, and he had a cane, but he was one of the best C# developers I'd ever met. He was amazing, and I remember he would go down to we had like a cafeteria area in our building, and he would actually go there for lunch. But what they would do is they would put the food on his tab, and so he would buy stuff. But he would never know. There was never any exchange of money until it was time to. He would probably pay up on some regular basis. But I never thought of how difficult it would be, like for instance, if he didn't go to that cafeteria, that knew him, and he went somewhere else, how difficult it would be for him to actually, pay for his lunch every day. So I think this is a great example of something. And so anyway, so if you find this kind of intriguing, we're going to use US dollars. You'll download them from Blob Store. Put them on a local GPU or CPU machine, and we'll look at some of the transfer learning involved to actually train and classify currency in the case of these pictures of these US dollars. So anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention. Hopefully this is giving you an example of how maybe you can go change the game for yourself and for your company using artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Darwin Schweitzer. 各位贵宾，接下来我们很荣幸邀请到台湾 AI 实验室创办人杜义景 Ethan Du, founder of Taiwan AI Labs, 为我们带来 Innovate AI in Taiwan and for the World, Scale Up and Out Stories in Taiwan AI Labs with Azure Cloud. 让我们掌声欢迎主讲人杜创办人。
Okay, thanks everyone. It's actually very interesting because before last year, if I joined Microsoft event, I always talk about Cortana because I was the principal dev manager for Cortana, and we talk about Cortana, for example, in Beijing Developer Summit and in the Build event in San Francisco. But this year, I'm talking about Taiwan AI Lab. And as you already heard that AI is a game for changing everything. So when I worked on Cortana in 2016, I started thinking about how we can do AI for more verticals and more industry. So if you think about in 2016 when Satya said we are going to democratize AI for everyone. That means everyone can easily have AI for their industry. And I'm also thinking about, because I already see the power of AI, you already can observe that AI have a big breakthrough in image recognition. We have a big breakthrough in the speech recognition. For example, in Microsoft, we have a ResNet 152 there. If you heard about Hong Xiaowen's presentation. It's a very big issue that the very first time computer science beat the human beings on the image recognition. And also it was the very first time. If you ever heard about like XD Huan Xuandong talk about speech recognition, in 2016 we beat human on the speech recognition. And also I think this year we beat human on machine translation. That's actually a lot of great breakthrough inside Microsoft. So last year I come back to Taiwan because I think it's really a very good opportunity for all the industry. And we already democratized AI. That means actually it's a very good time, like a dot-com period, like 20 years before. For all the industry, we can try AI, industry plus AI, and that will be new things. And for the AI itself, it will become an industry, like Google, Facebook. They all boom after dot-com era. Now, the top 5 companies, 3 of them, Google, Facebook, Amazon, never burn after .com company. I can forecast that in the next 10 years, we can see the AI company that is burned. That will be the new tech giant. So last year, April, I come back to Taiwan, and we have Ministry of Science and Technology in Taiwan, and we also have our digital ministry, Tang Feng Zhengwei. We co-founded Taiwan AI Lab last April, and we soon have a very good group. We group together the best of Taiwan engineers and also the computer scientists who are the best in the machine learning. For the very first topic we were thinking about last year is, if you ever remember that last June, we have Taiwan has a very good director called Chi Bo-lin. So he was killed by the aircraft accident. And the reason he was killed by a aircraft accident is because he tried to make a friend by his hand and in the aircraft. And he said the reason he cannot use the air drone for the air friend is because the drone cannot do the camera movement and cannot do the scene selection and cannot do the auto editing and also all the color enhancement. From that topic, I think, oh, that's actually a very good topic we want to try. So I quickly, I still remember last year, the DevDays here. I actually talked to Hong Xiaowen in this building, actually the same place here. Say we want to try AI in Taiwan, and we want to try AI for the goodness of the human beings. And in Microsoft, we actually have an AI for Earth program that will sponsor people around the world if we want to try AI for the human beings. So with the help with Taiwan, Microsoft, we enter this program, and we start doing the we start doing the research about how we can use leverage AI for the drone and use it to know the beauty of our homeland and also know the problem of our homeland. For example, the beauty of our homeland, like every picture you can see a very beautiful scene, but also we can also find a lot of the problems. So we last year we quickly start a partnership with Tainan City, and we try this AI drone project. And this AI drone project we quickly evolved into 3 versions of the AI drone and doing the 360 scene selection. So if we want to, you can think about this like in the last speech, when we talk about AI, this is about big data, it's about IoT, it's about cloud computing. And for the drone project, it is the same. So the drone project itself, we stream the video out of the drone and to the cloud. And then in the cloud, we want to compute out of the 360 videos, we want to compute which scene we want to select. So this is an example. At the left-hand side, you can see it is a 360 video. But after we have our AI computation, actually, if we tell AI, I want to see the water flow, you can see it will select the scene that actually focus to the water flow. That's our idea, and we quickly come out this idea. So we use a neural net and also auto-train out of the 360 program. So this is an example that we test in National Taiwan University. If you look, I tell our AI, I want to see the land, or I want to see the driveway, 台大椰林大道, or I want to see the building or the skyscraper. Actually, the AI will automatically focus on the thing I want to select. That means, actually control a drone is a very difficult thing because you need to control not only the direction, but also you need to control the camera movement. But with this AI, actually, the AI will control the scene selection, camera movement by itself, and we can also have an autopilot on the right. So with the same 360 video, I can tell my AirDrone I want to watch the water flow, I want to see the mountain, or I want to see the forest. It will come out of different movies. That's very, very beautiful, and you see it's all done automated by AI. And we also leverage what we have on the market. For example, in the ImageNet, since AI already beat human on the object detection, and AI can also detect the scene. For example, the Place 365 is a neural net to know the scene. So with the same technique, we train the AirDrone. I want to follow the bike, so it will follow the bike. I want to see the beauty of the bridge, then he can take a route, and then you can see the AirDrone is actually watching the bridge. But you know the 360 scene, if we make movie out of the 360 camera, the camera quality, the video quality is actually not that good. It's like the left-hand side. However, for a professional director like Chibolin, he actually want the high-quality image like the right-hand side. Same, this is also one of the artificial intelligence problem. We can also train AI to learn from the low-quality image and try to do the color selection and also color enhancement for then make it become a high-quality image. And not only the color is the problem, but also how we can take a actually beautiful picture is also a problem. So we also want to teach AI the AccessNet 审美观，就我们要教人工智慧要 So what is a beauty and what is not a beauty? For example, the image like the left-hand side. If you take the photo picture like the up side, it's actually a good picture. However, if you take the picture like the lower side, it's actually not as good like the top one. So how we can train AI to discriminate the good picture, good snapshot or the bad snapshot? So we actually also random select a bunch of the pictures out of the directed cheese frame, and we train the neural net to distinguish what are the good picture and what are the bad pictures. So this is the result, as you can see. If the AI can tell, originally I just tell AI I want to see a ship. This ship is in Tainan, it's the Yangjian. It's a pretty famous battleship. So if you just use an ImageNet, say I want to see the scene with a battleship, it will take one picture like the left-hand side. But it is not that good because it's kind of like if you tell some people, take a picture of me. Some people will take good pictures, but some others will take very ugly pictures. And for the picture like the left-hand side, it's actually not as good as the right-hand side. And you can see after we have the AccessNet, the 审美的网络, so the AI can take actually very good pictures. And this is not only a picture, it is actually a movie. We can teach an AI AirDrone to take a very good movie compared to the other one. You only know to take the battleship, but don't know which scene is better than the others. So you can already see the difference of the two AI network. So one can represent the beauty of the scene and the other cannot. And for the smart city for the smart city problem in Taiwan, so after we found AI Lab, we actually have a lot of discussion with the Taiwan local and the central government about what is a smart city. So we focus on 3 areas: Medicare, smart city, and the human interaction. For the smart city part, in Taiwan, the very different from, I think the very important thing is, for all AI in Taiwan, we will talk about like what we should do, what AI should do, but not what AI can do. So I also remember that Satya also mentioned this, the same part in the Build event, and it's actually pretty pretty aligned with what we are thinking here. Like for all the AI we want to leverage, we want to work in Taiwan, we want to improve the humanity, but with your privacy and the integrity secure. So take the project in Taipei City, for example. When we talk about the surveillance camera, so in Taipei, we have more than, I think more than 20,000 surveillance cameras owned by the city government. But for the surveillance camera in Taipei, compared to some other places, they use surveillance camera to detect like a human face and to know who are you and count your credit score. In Taipei, the surveillance camera we want to use, we want to leverage is actually want to know the traffic jam. However, one criteria is we cannot identify the human inside this camera. So in Taipei, we can only have like a low resolution camera. And because we want to conserve the energy consumption, so the camera quality is actually not that good, and the frame per second is actually low. So, and in Taipei, there are a lot of traffic and a lot of cars on the street every day. However, only 16% of the traffic incident or the event are detected by the central monitoring system. So we quickly talk about leveraging AI for the traffic incident detection in Taipei. So we designed a Taipei traffic density network with the Taipei city government. So with this traffic density network, it can actually real time count the traffic volume, and it can also real time know the traffic congestion and also know the traffic incident on the Taipei Main Street. And it already inside our system. And so those are the smart city projects. One is the airdrome, and the other is the Taipei traffic density network. And there's a third part we are also collaborating with Microsoft is the academic search. You know, a lot of time when we are doing some academic research, the very first question for the people is how we can crowd all the papers, how we can know all the papers. But by collaborating with Microsoft Academic Graph, it already have all the information inside Azure, and we can already consume it. And there's a very interesting problem we are targeting is for the medical data, because the publication of the medical papers is actually grow exponentially. And all the data they can not really read all the papers. So that's the reason there's a data in IBM, they have a Watson Health group. They are working on helping the data and the medical researches. And here in Taiwan AI Lab, by consuming the academic search graph, we train AI to read the papers by the NLP technique. For example, this is the the project we collaborate with National Taiwan University Hospital, how to read the genetic papers without doctor's help. And there are also other projects we are working on. For example, I don't know how many of you know PTT here. Can you raise your hand? Okay, that is still good. So in Taiwan, we actually have a nonprofit online social network, and that become the very dominant social network in Taiwan. And this is nonprofit one. That's a very special case compared to United States, like Facebook is a dominant social network. So we consume the data of this social network, and we produce the news report site by this social network. Then the writer of the news report site is AI. Now we use a summary model to write a news article out of this social network automatically. And also in Taiwan, we also train our own language model and acoustic model out of the Taiwan data. So we have a Yatin input method. So how many of you know why it is called Yatin? 大家知道这个为什么叫雅婷吗？ Because Yatin is the most common name in Taiwan. So every one of you have a friend named Yatin. So we train our language model and acoustic model out of Taiwan's data. So and we produce this Yatin 输入法, Yatin speech recognition, and also Yatin language understanding model. So every one of you can download from like iPhone's App Store, the Yatin input method, and try it. A lot of times people think Chinese input methods are dominated by other companies. However, in most of the companies they cannot do very well in Taiwan because they don't use the Taiwan language model and acoustic model. And these are a couple examples. It's actually written by some other people on the internet. So if you are Taiwanese, you know those language models actually cannot recognize well in the traditional speech recognition. And we do all these projects in Taiwan inside our lab. We collaborate with our 国晚中心. And we also scale up and scale out with Microsoft Azure. If we want the computing part and we want to scale out everywhere, we use Azure. And Azure can help us to scale out around the world. And that is the way Taiwan AI Lab, we start experiment in Taiwan and how we scale out the world. And this is, and I also want to introduce, by partnership with Microsoft, Microsoft also quickly found the AI Center in Taiwan. And after Microsoft found the AI Center in Taiwan, Google and Amazon, they also found AI Center in Taiwan. And Taiwan become very the important hub for the AI research. And if you look about the job posting this year, Taiwan is actually the most active looking for employee place around the world compared to 43 other places. And from 2018, starting the 2018 till now, we have 46 international companies set up 62 research centers, innovation research centers in Taiwan, and the investment is 60 billion NT dollars, more than 60 billion NT dollars in Taiwan. So that is actually a very good start. After we start Taiwan AI Lab for a year, and we actually have a lot of very promising results here. And I hope everyone in Taiwan, if you want to innovate, try to think about the problem first, and by leveraging the current platform you have, and try to think about the problem you have. Do not reinvent the wheels, and leverage the good partner, leverage the data. For the success in Taiwan AI Lab, I believe there will be 3 areas. It's the data innovation, algorithm innovation, the experience innovation. And that's the talk I want to deliver today. And thanks everyone.
Thank you, Ethan, for the inspiring speech. 各位贵宾，接下来我们很荣幸邀请到 Jan Kristofic, Principal PM Manager of Office 365 at Microsoft, 以及 Michael Bauman, Senior Program Manager of Office Interoperabilities Team at Microsoft, 为我们带来 Modern Authentications, Security and Data Protections in Office 365。让我们掌声欢迎主讲人 Mr. Jan Kristofic 以及 Mr. Michael Bauman. Let's welcome the speakers.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Jan Kristofic. I'm a lead program manager at Microsoft, and together with me is Michael Bauman, who's a senior PM on my team. We're going to talk about modern authentication, security, and data protection. This is quite a broad topic, so I'm going to take you on a journey of data and data protection, talking about how data is traveling from our data centers to user devices, to being shared with other people in your organization or outside of your organization, and how we can keep the data secure. So not so long ago, the firewall was a security perimeter, right? So your users, your applications, your data, everything was within the boundaries of your firewall. And if you wanted to access your corporate data, you had to dial in, or you had to VPN. If you were at home on a weekend and needed to do some email or work on a document, if you didn't have VPN or if you didn't have a dial-in, a dial-up session, then you could not access your data, right? As a matter of fact, I've been in Taiwan the first time 20 years ago. At the time, I was delivering an Exchange server administration training, and that was pretty much the world back then. In 20 years, Taipei has changed quite a bit, and our technology landscape obviously has changed quite a bit as well. So this is much like the reality is today in our environment, right? So no longer are your users, your data, and your application only within your data centers. You know what your users are used to do today? They're traveling, they're moving around, they expect to be able to work with their devices from their home. They are merging, blending work and personal life. So essentially, when people are home, well, they will keep an eye on email, they will work on this last document before the deadline. But when they're at work, they may also want to be accessing some of their social life and see what's going on outside of work. And of course, what also changed is the mobility and the devices that we all have. I mean, we're all running around with smartphones that are very rich computing and devices, and just enable you to be productive on the way. So as you're using these devices, again, the temptation is big just to keep all of your life on those devices and to have both personal content and work content, which is making it more difficult, of course, for organizations to manage what does it mean for your data to be safe and how do you control the flow of information. So there are, of course, risks with the new landscape that we have today. So starting with identity, it is a risk today if you have an identity or the more you use various environments. So if you're using your corporate identity, you're using social network identities, you have some other services that you're using in the cloud. As an end user, you will have to remember these different identities, and maybe you will be using the same password on those different environments. And if the password is compromised in one place, then all of your data is compromised, possibly because with the same password, an attacker could access your data. Of course, you may have malicious software on a device that may just capture passwords and again put data at risk. Another risk, of course, is since there are so many locations out there that are available to end users, it's fairly easy for an end user to store corporate data on a non-work location. So for example, I'm working on a piece of email, I'm at work, and I'm thinking I will want to be working on that later on, well, I may just forward that piece of email to myself, to my personal mailbox. That's a very common scenario. Or I may just save it to my personal storage so that I can access it again from home. This is a problem for enterprises, obviously, because you have no control on that piece of content. And if that employee is to leave the company at some point, you have no way to revoke access to that content that has been moved away by the employee. So just to give you some numbers out there, just to realize what we're talking about, over 60% of the data breaches today are directly due to passwords being compromised, weak passwords or default passwords being used. 80% or over 80% of the employees today admit storing corporate data on locations that are not meant to be for corporate data, so where corporate IT has no governance and no visibility. All of that is creating risks. So how do we manage that, and how do we keep up with this changing world? Obviously, we're not going to go back to a world where the perimeter is a safety boundary, so these times are gone. So we need to look at other ways to protect the data, and for that we need to look at 4 pillars. We're looking at protection of the users, protection of the devices, protection through the apps, and protection of your data. And this is a chain that we need to look at end to end. So let's start with identity and access management. So identity is a foundation for mobility today. So as you start to explore cloud services moving from a traditional on-premises environment, the first question that comes up is, what are the identities that I'm going to use? Obviously, you do not want your employees and your users to have to use identities in multiple environments. It's difficult for them to have to remember username and passwords. It's difficult for your help desk to help your users if you have too many username and passwords. So the notion of having a single identity that essentially means extending for your on-premises identity into the cloud identities is a way to go, right? So with Microsoft Azure Active Directory, we're providing you with a simple way to extend your on-prem identities to the cloud. And these identities will be enabling users keeping the same username, keeping the same password to access cloud services. So this is really important and really key, also for the developers out there. When you build applications, when you build services, you want to ensure that users can have that single identity model, and again, just make it much easier for users and for administrations who have to manage that. And providing a single sign-on experience here is really key. So we talked about protecting identities and how weak passwords or compromised password is a fundamental risk today. So one of the things that everyone out there should be doing really today is use multiple factors of authentication. So only relying on a username and password today is no longer sufficient. Just show of hand. How many people today are required to use multi-factor authentication to access their corporate data? That's not a lot. How many of you can access your work data only with a username and password? All right. Okay, so this is something where, as you move to the cloud, obviously cloud applications are accessible from internet, and you really want to be careful about how do you protect your identity. So starting by enabling multi-factor authentication is really key out there. And as you purchase Office 365 and start to move on the journey to the cloud, Azure will be providing you with multi-factor authentication capabilities. Some basic capabilities are provided free of charge with well, at least with no additional cost with Office 365, with every subscription. And then we have more advanced capabilities for customers who also want to use Azure MFA to protect on-prem applications and services. So now let's talk about something really interesting here. We talked about AI quite a lot this week. And here is a great example how artificial intelligence can help us protect your data even more. So because we are in the cloud, because the identities that we're managing are in the cloud, there is just a lot of signals that we can start to look at in order to detect possible risk situations. How good would it be when a user is attempting to sign into your environment to know in advance whether there's a risk associated with that sign-in? So this is something that we provide with Azure Active Directory. And there are several ways that we're looking at to detect that are listed on the slide here. Just to give you a couple of examples, one being impossible travel. If you see the same user trying to sign in from multiple locations, I have a sign-in connection from Taiwan, then a minute later I have a sign-in attempt from the US, and a minute later I have a sign-in attempt from France, then you may guess that there's something odd going on there. So we detect whether this would be a VPN connection or not, taking this out. But again, this helps us just understand that there may be something going on here. We also detect things such as leaked credentials. This is something we do offline. There are black site, dark site on the internet sharing compromised password. So this is something that we're looking at as well, just to know if some of the identities that you may be using could have been compromised. And all of these together allow us to give a risk score to individual sign-in attempts. And based on these risk scores, we can take actions. You as an administrator can take action, and you can have a look at what other sign-ins that have been identified as risky. Is there any measure that you want to take yourself, reach out to the user, find out what happened? Or do you want some automated responses? So some of the automated responses can be, well, if that password has been compromised, the first thing that I want to do is to have the user reset their password, so we can just enforce that automatically. Or if the user hasn't been using multi-factor authentication for a while, just enforce multi-factor authentication, make sure that they provide something else than just the password, such as a confirmation over SMS or confirm through an application, so that they're granted access to the system moving forward. So the last point I'd like to discuss here around identities is the notion of conditional access. And this is really powerful. We have more and more companies starting to use this today, which is how do you better protect and control access to cloud services? Again, back in the days, the firewall was pretty much what you were looking at, and you would only access, enable access to certain services and certain ports. What we're looking at today is a much more powerful engine where you can set rules that will enable your users to be accessing the service or to be blocked from accessing the service based on certain conditions. So these conditions can be many, such as what is the location of the user? What is the status of the device? Is a device known to be healthy? Is this a corporate device? Is this an unknown device? It can be based on users, groups. It can be per application, and it can also, just as we've just seen, based on the risk that we have been identifying. So a couple of scenarios here could be, I want only my users that are within my corporate environment to be able to access Office 365 without providing multi-factor authentication. But if I see a connection coming from outside of my environment, then I want to enforce multi-factor authentication and make sure that I have that additional degree of confidence. The other example I gave earlier is if I detect a risk situation, then again I want to ensure that I have multi-factor authentication being requested. All right, so with that, we're actually going to look at a demo here on how this is working and how this is pieced together. So, Michael?
Great. Thank you, Jan. And good morning, DevDays. So, as Jan mentioned, two-step verification is a method of authentication that requires one verification method and a second critical layer of security. This could be something that you know, like a password, or something that you have, like a phone. In some cases, it can be even biometrics, something that you are. So what I'm going to show you now is how easy it is to set up the multi-factor authentication service on your users in your organization. You can do this by either going to the Office 365 Admin Center or to the Azure Active Directory portal and selecting a group of users or a specific user that you would like to enable MFA on. In this example, I'm just going to select Will Gregg, and within 2 clicks, I can enable multi-factor authentication. Once I have that updated, I'm going to try to log in with Will's account in another browser to see what the experience looks like. And oops. Try it one more time. And you can see that instead of logging in and giving me access to the service, it's requiring Will to set up the multi-factor authentication. It gives him an option of selecting either a phone, as a text message, or through a mobile app. Okay, very simple, very quick. So now let's take it a step further and create a conditional access policy on Will's account. So by going into the Azure Active Directory portal, selecting conditional access, we can define a new policy that will meet the needs of our organization. One of the challenges that IT administrators have with defining access control is mastering the balance between productivity and security. And that's what conditional access helps you to define well. So what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to go in and select Will, specific user. And as I do this, I also want to mention that you can programmatically access and configure Azure either through Microsoft Graph or directly through PowerShell. So I'm going to select Will Gregg. Will select done. I'm then going to select a specific app by which I want this policy to apply to. So I'm going to select an app, and it's going to give me a list of cloud apps. In this example, I'm just going to choose Office Sway. But you'll see a list of applications that you have either written or that are available in your organization that are based on the cloud. I'm going to select Sway. And then here's where I define the conditions that Jan mentioned. You have the sign-in risk, which leverages the machine learning capabilities of Azure to determine the various risks that may be associated with the sign-in. You have the different platform types, which we'll configure in a second. You have the location-based access, maybe it's an unfamiliar network or geography. And then you have client apps and device states that are also associated with Microsoft Intune. And we can look at that as well in a minute. So for this demo, since I'm running on a Windows box, what I want to do is configure the platform to be Windows so that we can see what the behavior looks like once we enable this policy. So Windows, okay, done. And now this is where it gets interesting. I need to select the access control. Now, if I wanted to grant access, I can do so, but I could have some caveats that are required, like requiring multi-factor authentication or ensuring that the device that he is signing into is marked as compliant within Intune. But for the sake of demo, I'm just going to block access all up, just so you can see what the behavior looks like. I'm going to name this policy, prevent sway on Windows, and then enable it and create it. Once this gets created, I'm given a success message. I know it's enabled. I'm going to jump over to the other browser. I'm on Sway, logging in on a Windows machine. Let's see what the behavior is. So Will and interrupt. And let me just refresh this real quick. Takes a minute to get it to go back to Sway. Pop up. So there it goes. It took a little bit to get applied, but you can see that I get a message saying that I was successfully able to sign in, but I'm not allowed to access this resource. So again, just showing you the ease of applying a conditional access policy in your organization. Back to the slides, please. If you're a developer and you want to enable the same experiences in your code as you just saw with the Microsoft apps, you can do so by taking advantage of some of our Azure Active Directory authentication libraries and SDKs. You may have heard about that a little bit yesterday. You'll hear about it more today because part of the benefits of leveraging the SDK is getting access to Microsoft APIs like Microsoft Graph. Azure, the ADAL SDK was first enabled in Office 2013 with some configuration, as well, of course, as Office 2016. It gives you single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, conditional access support, and a host of other benefits in your application. If you want to see actual how to implement this, we've got quite a few samples on GitHub, on github.com/officedev, as well as github.com/Microsoft Graph. So with that, pass it back to you, Jan.
Thank you, Michael. So just one last word on modern authentication. So modern authentication is really central in our authentication story today. So we've been moving from a world where before modern authentication, we eventually had fixed username and password prompts. So if you've been using Outlook in particular, this is something that you certainly have seen as well, just a username and password. And if you were trying to turn on multi-factor authentication, you were essentially running into an issue here where you could not satisfy a multi-factor authentication challenge because the UI was just not planned to support that. So now with the ADAL library, which is something that we have implemented in every single Office application today, we have this rich interface where we can provide essentially any type of challenge, including multi-factor authentication, but also enabling smart cards or certificate-based access, as well as support for third-party identity providers for people who are not using ADFS, but using some other SAML provider out there. So by using this again in your applications, you're just making sure that you also provide the same level of capabilities to your customers, and also ensuring that when a customer is configuring something like conditional access or wants to benefit from some of the advantage of Azure Active Directory that we've just seen, these also automatically flow into your applications. All right, so with that, we'll just continue our journey from, okay, you've got identity protected, you've got the access to the data under control, but now you have that data that has been moving onto the device, and how do you keep the data secure on that device? So let's have a quick look at the landscape out there. So there are plenty of devices for your users to choose from, being laptops, tablets, phones, etc. But one of the key differences as well is whether these are work-owned devices. These are devices that your company is managing. Typically, you have patches under control, you know which versions you are running, you have antivirus software, you may have some IT policies that you deploy on them, and you're generally trusted, and you don't have a problem having users have the data on these devices. On the other hand, you have personal devices, and you may also want to enable users to access your work data from their personal devices. This is a much more difficult situation because how do you manage patching? How do you manage antivirus? How do you manage the security of your data on those devices? So the first answer to that would be to look at mobile device management. So mobile device management is something that is frequently used in the industry to protect data on mobile devices. And by mobile devices, I mean we have a very broad definition here. This applies to Android, iOS, Mac, and even Windows devices that can be considered mobile, such as a Windows tablet or a Windows laptop that people may want to take with them. So what you can do with mobile device management is provide a security on the device by enforcing some of your policies on the device, such as, well, I want the device to be encrypted, and I want a PIN to be set on the device. So if my tablet is lost, if my phone is lost, and I have data on it, and someone who possibly stole that device cannot do anything with it because, again, the storage is encrypted, and because a PIN is preventing access to the device itself. And there are many options around what complexity you're setting up, how often you want the password to be updated, and so on. Interestingly as well, if this is a work device, there are a number of other things that you can do, such as deploying configurations, so VPN configurations, and others, such as initiating a wipe of the device. So this is a key scenario as well. So if a device is stolen, even though the data cannot be accessed, you may eventually still want to wipe the content of that device remotely, right? So that the device is reset, all the data is erased, and it's back to a clean state with no data on it. So this is great, but this works very well with company-provided devices. If we're talking about a personal device, users are not always willing or maybe reluctant to actually enroll their personal device and to have them managed by your IT, right? If you have a personal phone, you purchase it yourself, you have your family pictures on it, do you really want to have your IT administration manage that device? So we have an alternative to that, which is mobile application management. So mobile application management can be used in place or together with mobile device management. So you don't have to choose between both. You could have both used at the same time. So let's assume that you don't have mobile device management and you want your users to be able to access their work files from their personal devices while keeping the data secure. So now what we are providing is a way to protect those applications so that every single application that is enrolled with mobile application management will be encrypting its data locally on the device and will be ensuring that a PIN is requested. You already have a PIN at the device level, that's great. You don't have one, then the application is going to ask you for a PIN. And with that, you can keep your personal stuff that is not managed by IT, and then you have your work applications, on the other hand, that your IT has control of, and again, where remote wipe scenarios can be supported so that if you leave the company, access can be removed and revoked, and the data that is sitting on these phones is no longer accessible while your personal stuff remains on that data. So this is a great story both for IT and for the end users who own these devices. With that, we have some more interesting scenarios, such as how do we actually keep a good separation between work and personal? I talked earlier about the risks of opening work data and saving it to a third-party cloud provider, or doing a copy-paste between a work application and a personal application, potentially sharing data that shouldn't be shared. So here again, there are policies that we can enforce on the applications that will instruct the applications that support mobile application management to prevent copy-paste operations or saving as from a corporate context to a personal context. So here as well, we're going to be looking at a demo, but before that,
thank you.
Handing over to Michael.
Yeah, so many of you are attending this event to learn how to build powerful, intelligent applications. Some of you may already have line of business applications that you regularly deploy. Would you mind going back to the slide? Deploy to your organization. And you want the management and security consistency across your entire application portfolio so that users who are using Microsoft Word you have the same capability and management as you would for your line of business application. And with that, there's a few options that are available for you. The first is if it's a Xamarin-based application, you can use our Xamarin component. The second is the traditional way, and that's integrating the MAM SDK directly into your code. That gives you full feature functionality. It allows you to do interesting scenarios that Jan just mentioned around multi-identity in the scenario where an app maybe is used on a personal basis as well as a professional basis. And then the third option is using the Intune app wrapper. This is an option for simple applications that don't have any built-in data protection, and you may not have the source code for it. And how it works is essentially you wrap the application that you have signing authority for with the SDK so that you can get the management capabilities within Intune directly in that line of business app. So if you wouldn't mind switching over to the demo box. Thank you. So what I'm going to show you now is what that experience looks like for the user and what it takes to actually wrap an app. And it's actually so simple. It's a single line in a PowerShell script. So I've run the script just right before here just so you can kind of see it run. But because it's a little bit difficult to see, I copied it over to a Word document. And there's essentially just four parameters, or a few parameters that you need to do. The first is the input path of the application that you'd like to wrap, the output path of where you'd like to put it, and then the key store information that goes with it. It takes about 5 minutes to run, but once you've done that, you can go into Microsoft Intune and deploy that application to users in your organization. And once you've done that, you can then create app protection policies. And this is when it gets interesting. So I've already gone ahead and done that. And one small note as I go through this menu. The Microsoft Intune menus that you're seeing here were all built using Microsoft Graph. And there's a whole collection of APIs that are available to you to learn about how, if you wanted to get a programmatic insight and view into your organization or provision your Intune environment, you can do so with Microsoft Graph. So jumping into the application policy that I've already created, and I've already assigned it to my one user. I've only got a single user here. Let's take a look at some of the things that you can do. Okay. As this comes up, you see that you've got quite a bit of selection here. You can prevent backups. You can force encryption. You can manage cut, copy, and paste and what the behavior is along those lines. You can manage how data moves between different applications, how contacts are synced. For this demo, what we've done is we've enabled two things. One is we've blocked any sort of cut, copy, or paste to my line of business application. And the second one is forcing a PIN to be required when you access the application. That's simple. So you can define the details of what that is. I'm requiring a 5-digit PIN, but there's all sorts of other security and access control management capability that exists here that you can set up for your organization. So I'm going to jump over to my app, and let's take a look to see what the user experiences. So this is a simple graph app that we wrote and wrapped with the MAM into an SDK. And you can see that I'm immediately prompted with a requirement to enter my PIN. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that.
So, and Michael, just to be clear, the requirement to enter a PIN is not something that you built into the application. That was added by the wrapper, right?
That's correct. Yep. So none of the management capabilities was anything that we coded. This was all added with that single PowerShell line. It was very simple to get this sort of functionality attached to your line of business application. So once I log in, okay, this is just a calendar app. I can select some data in my application. Here I'm just going to select a random appointment monthly. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to select some content within it. I'm going to copy it. And now I'm going to go into another application that isn't managed, just so that we can see what the behavior is like if a user takes data from a managed application and tries to paste it in a non-managed application. So as I try to paste it, I'm not able to. It says your organization data cannot be pasted here, proving that the policy is working as expected. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jan, and he's going to show the experience with information protection on Windows.
All right, so I'm switching here to a Windows device. So I'm a user here. I'm accessing my work OneDrive. And on this OneDrive here, I have a report that I've been meaning to be reading for some time. So I'm actually taking this report here, and because I may want to read it offline, I will just download it here on my device. So I will just go and do that. I will save it here. And now look what happened. When I open the folder, you may see my file here, but then you may see there is a small icon up there. It looks like a briefcase. It's a little bit hard to see on the big screen here. But next to that, you also see a file ownership. So what this is telling you is that the document that I just taken out of my SharePoint and stored locally on my disk is recognized as being a work file, and that's a file that belongs to my corporation, and it has therefore been encrypted. Again, if you look at the ownership here, it's work. I could switch it to personal if I wanted to, but by default, it will be stored as a personal, as a work file. So this device is not managed by a company. This is my personal device, and I just decided to store some content here. So back to what I was saying earlier, an important scenario here is making sure that the data that I download on personal devices is encrypted. Because if I ever leave the company, or if my device is compromised, then as an administrator, I will want to be able to revoke access to that file and make sure that that file is no longer recoverable and readable. So let me go ahead and open this file. Again, from an end user, you will see I can just work normally. I don't see a difference. I don't get extra prompts. I can just do my work as expected. Again, here in Word, if I just look at the details, I can see that this file here is managed by my environment. The interesting thing as well, if I try to go ahead and save and I choose my personal OneDrive, I will get a message here telling me that only the locations approved by my organization are available. So I'm actually not given a choice here to save it into my personal OneDrive, which may be a good thing in this case. So I'm going on and reading the report. There's a lot of good information here. And this is something I find here really interesting, talking about the usage of our products. So I'm going ahead, I'm copying this, and I really want to share that with my friends and colleagues. So let's go on Twitter. So I have a Twitter page open here, and I'm like, yeah, let's copy paste, right? So I will paste it here. Look what happens. Instead of the paste operation happening, I'm met with a prompt, and that prompt asks me, well, do you really want to use work content here? So Edge recognized here that this is not a work location, this is a public location, and as an end user, I was given the choice to use my work content here or not to use it. If I decide to use my work content here, this is going to be tracked in a way that my organization can follow and later on do an audit to find out if I have been compromising data. Well, maybe I won't do that here. One more thing that you should see as a difference is my SharePoint site here was recognized as being work content. You can see the small briefcase logo, whereas obviously Twitter is not part of my work context. So instead of sharing on Twitter, I will use Notepad, and I will make a note for myself. And this is a summary. And again, I will paste this here. So at the moment, this is just a regular Notepad file. It's not work, it's not necessarily personal. I could go ahead and save it anywhere I want. If I paste my data, however, look what's going to happen. In addition to my data being pasted, I have again this small briefcase icon that just appeared here on top, meaning that we now recognize that the content that I have in Notepad is work content. So I'm going ahead, and again, I'm going to save this file here. I will just call it summary. I still have a briefcase logo. All right. So let's have a look again at my files. So here's a new summary file, again, with a briefcase. So again, I will try to do something here. I will just move it to my OneDrive. I'm kind of persistent here. And then again, the action is interrupted, and I'm again given a choice of whether actually moving these to personal, in which case this is going to be tracked by my organization, or not doing that. So since I actually wanted to share that with a colleague, what I'm going to do instead is move that to a USB key. So I have a USB key here in my device. I will just move this over. Then again, I'm given an option. Do I want to move this as personal, or do I want to copy as work protected? So this time what I can do is actually copy it as work protected, move that content or copy that content over to my USB key, and you can see here that the protection remains available. So I can still open that file, obviously, but you know what? The last thing I'm going to do here is actually change my identity, and I'm going to sign in as my local admin on this machine. I could just have my chance handed over that USB key to a colleague or to Michael here. So here's my file. What's going to happen when I try to open it here? I don't have permission to open the file, and I will not be able to open it. Okay? So what we've seen here is essentially similar to what we've just seen on the Android device or iOS device. We keep the data protected on those devices. We keep a separation between your personal data and your work data, and we make it easy for end users actually to navigate between these two worlds while warning them when something may happen and when there may be a breach of security. We can just go back to the slides, please. All right, so what we just saw is called Windows Information Protection on Windows. This is available since the anniversary edition of Windows 10. Again here, the notion being that you can separate business from personal data. We also have some applications where you have two identities. So for example, if you're using Outlook, you may have a personal account in Outlook, and you could have a work account in Outlook. So again, Outlook here will do the right thing. If you try to move content around from your personal mailbox to your work mailbox, you will see the same type of prompts that we have just seen in this demo. So again, providing one experience, isolating the data, making sure that work data remains encrypted on user devices so that the company keeps control on them, but still enabling the users to work with it. Here as well, just as the MAM SDK, we have some APIs for ISVs. So if you want to add web protection in some of your apps, you can do that as well. All right, so this leads us to the last section of our talk this morning, which is around information protection. So you already got a glimpse of information protection on Windows, but generally speaking, when we talk about information protection, there are a few concepts that are key here. So the first one being to protect your data at all times. So we want the data to be persistent. We want the protection to be persistent with the data. So just like we saw on the USB stick example, it's not because I'm putting a file on the USB stick or that I'm sharing it out that it should remain in clear text. And the data can be encrypted in itself. But we also want to enable safe sharing internally and externally. So for that, making sure that we know which are the identities we're sharing this data with, while empowering users to make the right decision. So just like we saw in the scenario before, as an end user, I am empowered to say, well, yes, this is data I can actually share out. I'm not prevented from doing so. As an administrator, by the way, I have the option of blocking these actions completely or by giving choice to the end user. I even have the option to do silent auditing just to know what's going on without prompting the users. So there are multiple options here. But the idea really is to empower users to make the right decision, not to prevent them from doing their work. And obviously maintaining visibility and control, so they're having the ability to audit, see what happened, have logs that tell you what kind of content has been shared is important, as well as revoking content that has been shared by mistake. So you may know Azure RMS, our right management services. This is again a technology that enables us to apply encryption to data. What we've been adding here is classification and labeling. This is quite powerful. Just think about that for a second. Wouldn't it be nice, when I have a piece of content, if as a user, I don't always have to think about, well, is this content I shouldn't be sharing? Is this content that is sensitive to my data? So here again, as an administrator, what you can do with classification is set some rules that are defined centrally that will analyze the data in real time as you try to share it. And if sensitive data is detected based on these rules, then the appropriate classification is going to be applied. And as an outcome of this classification, we can automatically suggest a protection or prevent sharing altogether. This is quite a good story, as well, of course, as monitoring and responding, so that if a user is choosing to go ahead and choosing to share content, and you later realize there was a violation, that you have, again, as an administrator, the opportunity to revoke the access rights on that content, so that that content is no longer available to the recipients who have been receiving it. This is just an example of that. Again, some policies just applying to content and applying classification automatically so that the appropriate level of protection can be given. So just to wrap this all together, what we've been looking at here is essentially a data protection lifecycle. So we started from the data centers. We've been looking at your Office 365 content. We've been looking at your identities and how we protect identities with multi-factor authentication, with identity protection and some AI that help us detect risk situations. Again, you have the ability to control access on your data, so that data is not because it's in the cloud that any identity that is valid should be able to access the data. So we have rich control over that. You only want to have your managed device to be able to access data, that's fine. You only want to have your MAM applications able to access data, we can do that as well, so that we know that these applications will keep protecting the content even on devices. So we talked about device security with mobile device management, MAM, and Windows Information Protection, and again, enabling safe sharing within and outside of your organization while keeping your data secure. We do have a number of other talks this afternoon.
Yes, and we highly recommend that you attend them. This is the first time we've introduced IT Pro content at the DevDays event, so we're really anxious to hear what you guys think if you want to see more of it next year. These are the 3 sessions that are happening this afternoon. The QR code will bring you to a survey that isn't about this session per se, it's more about the topics of what we're talking about. And one of the goals of our team is to understand the enterprise requirements that are facing your organization, specifically around access control, authentication, and information protection. So if you're an Office or Microsoft 365 subscriber and you have some familiarity with access control or information protection, we would love you to fill the survey out for us. Tell us what you think and what your experience has been, bad or good. Additionally, the one thing I forgot to mention earlier is that through the course of this event, we're giving away 300 Microsoft 365 accounts that are good for 1 year. That includes Office 365 and the Enterprise Management Suite, which is also inclusive of Microsoft Intune. So everything you saw today, and most of the Office sessions, or all of the Office sessions, you can do in that account. So if you have any questions about that, just find one of the Microsoft folks. We still have a few cards left if that's something that you're interested in. With that, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jan Christophic and Mr. Michael Bauman. 各位贵宾，接下来我们很荣幸邀请到 Mark Stafford, Principal PM Manager of Identity Service PM US at Microsoft, 为我们带来 Graph Roadmap and Updates. 让我们再次以热情的掌声欢迎主讲人 Mr. Mark Stafford.
Just say hi. Hello. All right, we'll get hooked up here. Give me 1 second. Thank you. We're here. Perfect.
You said you have 2 sections,
Yep.
30 and 30.
Yes. Thank you. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you for coming back to the second day of DevDays Asia. I'm delighted to be here to talk about Microsoft Graph. I actually have 2 talks. The first one is a roadmap and updates talk for Microsoft Graph, and the second one is how to add custom intelligence to Graph. So hopefully we can actually, I may have the wrong clicker here. Oh, sorry, 1 more second, there we go. Fast forward past the animation. Okay, so my name is Mark Stafford. I have the delightful job of working on the core part of Microsoft Graph. If you don't know what Microsoft Graph is, it is really best thought of as an API gateway where all the different APIs from Microsoft come together. And in this talk, we'll talk in detail about some of the APIs that exist there. But my day job is to actually review all the different APIs that come in. And so this talk in particular is one that I am passionate about. So we often make the promise that Microsoft Graph is all about you and the data that surrounds you. And again, we'll be looking at some of the APIs that exist inside of Microsoft Graph today. We say that all the data that's available to your organization, whether it's your corporate account, whether it's your personal account, is available through Microsoft Graph. And the best part is that there's only one way to access that information. One endpoint, one SDK, one set of documentation, one time registering your application. This is all goodness. And then the last part of the standard pitch is this slide, which I'm really not going to dive into in detail, because the point that I want to make here is not about this opportunity. These numbers are fantastic. But the point I want to make today is that over the past 2 years, Microsoft Graph has quintupled in size. It's 5x as large as it was 2 years ago. A big part of that is the Intune APIs that Jan and Michael were just talking about. So all that stuff that Michael was doing through the Azure Management Portal is possible through the APIs that exist inside of Microsoft Graph. And literally, if you open your browser debugger tools and are clicking through that particular portal, then you can see all the different calls going out to Microsoft Graph. And this is fantastic because it means that you can build your own tools around that sort of thing. So if you have a help desk scenario where you have a bunch of help desk operatives that you don't want navigating through the Azure Management Portal, then you can just build your own application, point it at Microsoft Graph, and do the exact same things that the Azure portal is doing. So we made a bunch of announcements at Build this past year. This slide has some of them, and you will get a copy of this slide deck, so I don't need to go through this in full detail, but I do want to call out a couple different things. Outlook has now made significant progress. We have almost everything in the Outlook APIs available through Microsoft Graph, and we're continuing to work really hard to close those gaps. So you can manage your working hours and rules and so on and so forth. You already could manage your mail and your calendar and your out-of-office notifications through Microsoft Graph. With SharePoint and lists, we continue to close more gaps here. With Windows, we have introduced a new set of APIs that are called the Project Roam APIs. Part of what these include is the Windows timeline as well as remote device commands. So let me just jump out of this slide deck for a moment here. And I mentioned the Windows timeline the other day. Sorry, hold on. I am not able to see my screen. Need to duplicate, maybe? Let's duplicate. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so I mentioned the Windows timeline in the graph overview talk yesterday. If you don't know what the timeline is yet, I can't display it on my screen, even though I have it, so you can actually see the little icon for timeline right here. However, I can't display it just because of how Windows renders with the duplicated screen. But this is what it looks like. It is the new task switcher. Sorry, let me try to zoom that to a reasonable size. And what you can do is you can actually search through history. So if you notice, there's a bar over here on the side that has now back until August 21 in this particular case. And you can actually scroll back through history and look at your activity history. And the APIs that power what shows up here are available to you through Microsoft Graph. So you can actually write these really fancy adaptive cards. So if you're on a mobile device and you're writing a Netflix application, or something like that, then you can write to the Windows timeline and somebody can walk up to their Windows device and pick up where they left off on their mobile device. I'm not going to actually launch this slide deck again here because I'm going to talk through a couple more things and then show one more screen. Spatial analytics is something that we're going to talk about in the next presentation when we're talking about custom intelligence inside of Microsoft Graph. But in a nutshell, it's really about IoT devices and being able to build spatial intelligence around those things. Office 365 has now brought the Bookings API to Microsoft Graph. Bookings is a new application inside the Office suite. It is best thought of as if you're running a small hair salon or a small restaurant or something along those lines, and you need to be able to set up appointments, then you can do that through Bookings. And this is really a small to medium business type offering. But all the APIs that power it are available through Microsoft Graph as well. And then we'll also be talking about security alerts and several other things throughout the course of the day. Let's see if we can get this launched again. Perfect. Okay, let me pivot this a different direction and look at it from a different angle. So we often talk about Microsoft Graph as being the API center for Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 is the combination of three things. The first one is Office 365, then Windows, then EMS, which is what Jan and Michael were just talking about. So when we talk about Office 365, their APIs are very mature. The things that are available inside of Microsoft Graph are extremely close to the actual capabilities of the Office APIs. In fact, so much so that in some cases, like OneDrive doesn't even talk about their direct APIs anymore. They still have them because they published them before Microsoft Graph existed, but you can't find public documentation anymore on OneDrive's direct APIs. They only talk about their APIs in the course or in the scope of Microsoft Graph. And increasingly, you're going to see more and more APIs at Microsoft doing this sort of thing. We're continuing to close the parity gaps with Office in large part in the Office world there, in the SharePoint world. We continue to add APIs for new products, so things like the Bookings API, which we just talked about, they don't even have a separate offering. It must be done through Microsoft Graph. And just continuing to reconcile existing gaps that we have. So we'll talk about Skype and Yammer in just a minute here. When we look at EMS, which is Azure Active Directory and Intune and all the APIs around there, we're reasonably mature, maybe not quite as mature as Office is, but most of the APIs are there. And a lot of the conditional access APIs and the Intune APIs that again, you saw in the previous talk are already available there. As with SharePoint, we're continuing to close parity gaps. Many people are using Azure Active Directory Graph today. We like to name things Graph at Microsoft. So we have the Azure Active Directory Graph, which is the old API for Azure Active Directory, and we have Azure Active Directory available through Microsoft Graph, which is the new API for Azure. However, there is still some functionality that exists in the first API, the Azure Active Directory Graph, that's not available yet through Microsoft Graph. We're closing those gaps really quickly. If at all possible, you should target Microsoft Graph and not AAD Graph. And again, we're adding APIs for new and existing products. So the conditional access stuff has APIs that are coming to Microsoft Graph. We have terms of use now that you can ask your users to sign when they sign in for the first time. Those APIs are available through Microsoft Graph. Windows is just starting. So they are just kicking things off. The Spatial Analytics API that I referred to is in Windows. The Project Rome APIs that I referred to, the user timeline and stuff, that's in Windows. And there's a whole mixed reality division at Windows that is starting to add lots of APIs to Microsoft Graph. And many of those things will be announced in the months to come. There are some frequently asked questions. I got the question yesterday about Yammer. Why isn't Yammer in Microsoft Graph yet? Why isn't Skype in Microsoft Graph yet? Some of these things are still coming, right? So recognize that this is one team that's bringing all these different APIs together, and we have prioritization. So that prioritization is sorted out based upon what's good for our customers and which teams are ready to come to Microsoft Graph. So we will be working on Skype and Yammer. I promise you they are coming to Microsoft Graph. I don't know when yet. Dynamics and the whole Dynamics family, which includes CDS and PowerStack and so on and so forth, are coming to Microsoft Graph. Dynamics Financials will be the first one to land. And they've been making announcements already about their APIs coming to Microsoft Graph. Things that are further out are the Azure ARM APIs and cognitive services. So the Azure ARM APIs allow you to manage VMs and all your assets inside of Azure. Cognitive services are pretty straightforward. You've heard a bunch of talks about them already. We are working to figure out how to layer these things into Microsoft Graph. And part of the reason this takes a little bit longer is because we really need to sort out the API experience. We want people who walk up to Microsoft Graph to experience one consistent approach, right? I was pushing on the one set of documentation, one application registration. We don't want you to come to Microsoft Graph and have several different experiences based upon which part of Microsoft Graph that you're using. Right now, Cognitive Services has a different API style than Microsoft Graph does. And it has a different subscription key. It has a different authentication mechanism. So we need to figure out how we're going to fit this into Microsoft Graph. But again, it will be in Microsoft Graph at some point in time. Meanwhile, there will be a talk later today about how you can use these things together. So this is obviously a lot of stuff to track, right? Figuring out what's happening inside of Microsoft Graph is a really significant effort. And so one of the resources that I would point you to, if I can get my web browser to load, is the Microsoft Graph changelog. You can get to the Graph developer documentation by just going to graph.microsoft.com. One of the resources there is the changelog, so you can just click on the changelog in the top nav here. And then there's a gigantic listing of all the changes that have been made. And as you scroll, you'll see all the different APIs and the additions that they are making. So this is a really good resource for using to track the API changes that are happening to Microsoft Graph and staying on top of changes. In fact, we have some of our MVPs who literally monitor this list. They've set up automated things that monitor this particular list to watch for changes, and this allows them to be aware of the latest changes literally in a notification type way. All right. So data is not the only thing that's available inside of Microsoft Graph. We also have what we call capabilities. And again, we're introducing new capabilities just like we're introducing new data. So one of the capabilities inside of Microsoft Graph is a capability called webhooks. Webhooks allow you to give Microsoft Graph a URL, and when a particular type of change happens, then Graph will actually come reach out to you and notify you that a change has happened. We now can do this on users and groups in v1.0. That was a commonly requested feature. You can also do Delta query with scoping filters. So I can ask for just group changes for a particular group or for a collection of groups. We increased our batching limits from 5 to 20 inside of a batch. So you can actually group together a set of requests that are going to be submitted to Microsoft Graph. Started at 5, now we can do 20. And so on and so forth. One thing in particular that I want to call out is the Open API description. So if you were familiar with Swagger, Swagger was an API description format that is widely adopted. The new name for Swagger, ever since it went to version 3.0, is Open API. We do now have an Open API description for Microsoft Graph. It's not public quite yet, but I will show it to you. And you can see what we're going to have in the very near future. I have this preloaded because the API description is so large that it causes most of the Swagger tooling to choke. So you may or may not be able to see the scroll bar on the side here, but this is just a teeny tiny little scrolling thing. There's an enormous amount of information in this Open API description. And in this particular case, we're just looking at the call to get devices. All right, we can see all the different query string parameters that are available. We can scroll down. We can see a description of the device ID. And having this sort of description available lights up new scenarios for us. So it allows us to connect more easily to any tooling that already supports the Swagger API description format. And again, this will become important for things like Power Apps and Power Stack, but also software outside of Microsoft. Managed access is also new. We will be talking about that in the next talk about custom intelligence. This is a slide that is the overview of what managed access is. I'll just give you kind of the teaser right now, which is that managed access really is best thought of as this tremendously high bandwidth pipe between Office 365 data today and Azure. So all the goodness that Darwin was talking about this morning with the different Azure solutions, you can bring to bear on your data inside of Office 365. And really what's happening is this data is getting copied over safely from O365 into your Azure tenant. And then you can literally do anything inside of that Azure tenant with that particular data. So whether you want to use Hadoop on it or something else, Databricks, doesn't really matter. As long as it's a feature that exists inside of Azure, then you can use it on your data. We took a look at the OpenAPI description. One other thing that we're working on is really lighting up a lot of new scenarios inside the Microsoft ecosystem. So some people are probably familiar with Power Apps. If you're not familiar with Power Apps, there's a detailed talk about it tomorrow, and using Power Apps in conjunction with your M365 data. But Power Apps allow citizen developers to go build applications. We'll take a look at one in just a second here. We already have done a lot of work to connect Power Apps to Microsoft Graph. We will enable the full gamut of what you can do inside of Microsoft Graph with that Open API description that we looked at. So Power Apps supports Open API. Right now, we have to do work every time we want to go build something in Power Apps. So we have to go light up this scenario and then that scenario. The Open API description is going to allow us to access everything inside of Microsoft Graph from Power Apps without doing that sort of incremental work. So let's take a look at one thing that we already have lit up in Power Apps. I'm going to jump back over to my web browser here. Maybe. So Power Apps, when you first log in, so I'm just at web.powerapps.com. You can see that the first thing you get presented with is a whole bunch of different templates. One of those templates is the meeting capture template. It's the one that I'm going to show today. I'm not actually going to click through this because some of the screens in Power Apps take a few minutes to load. But if I were to click on Make This App, then the next screen that I would see is this one, after having asked for consent. So it will ask you for consent to the things that the meeting capture app requires, which is your OneNote, your calendar, your camera, a few other things. But at that point in time, then you can actually start to see what this thing might look like. Now, this is just a preview of the application as it is, and we're going to have a chance to modify it in just a minute here. But I'm going to go ahead and click on one of these things so you can see what the meeting capture application does. So it has several different components to it. You can take notes on the meeting. You can create tasks from the meeting. You can see who the attendees are. And eventually, when you click Finish and Save, then you can actually export all that information out to different places, and you can send a follow-up email to the attendees. So if I were to actually click Make This App at this point in time, then it takes me it takes me to an editor. Let me see if I can sign in really quickly here. Browser timeout. Okay, I'm going to skip this. It would take me to a place where I can actually go edit that application. So if I don't like how it's rendered or I don't like what it's doing, then I can actually go edit that application. Again, there's a great Power Apps talk tomorrow that will give you lots of details about Power Apps and how you can use them. In addition to doing the Power Apps work, we're also working with Cortana and many other parties inside of Microsoft in order to light up these sorts of capabilities. I just restarted the deck. Give me 1 second to actually get back to where I was. Sorry about that. Okay, I think I was right at the end anyway. So again, there's lots of stuff happening with Microsoft Graph. We will continue to put more and more resources into Microsoft Graph and bring all those different APIs together so that you have one place to access all these things. With that, let's go ahead and move on to our next talk, which is about adding custom intelligence to Microsoft Graph. So we'll let the animation run here. So Microsoft Graph has all this data available in it, right? Tons and tons and tons of data, and that's all goodness. But really, a lot of times we want to have custom intelligence alongside that data in order to create even more value from that data. So we've got lots of data. How can we make it useful? Again, we've got this promise of all your data, all users, one way to access it. But the reality is that Graph is actually rarely 100% of what it is that you need. There's always something missing. There's a hole in your puzzle. And so it's entirely okay to supplement with other data and intelligence and bring other data and intelligence to bear so that you have a full puzzle. There are several different strategies that you can take for working with Microsoft Graph and custom intelligence. I'm going to talk about 3 of them today. One of them is to use the built-in insights inside of Microsoft Graph that we ship. A second one is to use the first-class partnerships that we build at Microsoft. And then worst-case scenario is you can bring your own intelligence. It doesn't matter whether that's Microsoft intelligence or some other intelligence that you're building. These are the 3 primary options for you. So let's start by talking about some of the built-in insights that we make available. We said that there's lots of data inside of Microsoft Graph. The truth is that we actually calculate some insights for you as well. So there is some very straightforward insights, like the People API or the Insights API. These tell you the people that you work with most frequently, or the files that you should be aware of. And we figure this out based upon the signals that we get from the way that you do your work. So if you commonly send emails to a particular person, or you're commonly in meetings with a particular person, then that person is going to rank higher on your most frequently worked with, the people API. Same thing for the files that are trending around you. So if your team has all opened a particular file, and Microsoft Graph can see that sort of signal, they can see that your team has all opened this particular file, it's going to rank that file higher in your trending API. Two of the APIs that I want to dive a little bit deeper into are the Security API, which is brand new as of this year, and the Spatial Analytics API, which is also brand new as of this year. So let's talk about the Security API first. Enterprises today really have this struggle that they're dealing with lots and lots of different security solutions. And there are some security solutions that try to bring things together, but realistically, you've got your antivirus sitting in one place, you've got your firewall sitting in another place, you've got your ticket management system sitting in a third place. And this is a struggle for IT pros and admins. They have disconnected alerts. They have different schemas and APIs for all their different types of work that they're dealing with. They have isolated security insights that they can't bring together in any sort of meaningful way. And these are exactly the sorts of things that Graph is trying to bring together, right? So there's lots of operational complexity that exists within this space. The Microsoft Graph Security API is designed to bring all these things together into one place for you. And you can actually access this today through security alerts. We'll take a look at it in just a second here. But the goal of the Microsoft Graph Security API is to unify all these alerts so that you can take actions on them. There are several major parts of the Graph Security API. Let me see if I can bring up my laser pointer here. So one of those parts, and the part that is shipped today, is the alerts. So the alerts are available today. This will aggregate alerts from multiple different providers. Today, we have support for many of the things that exist up here. So the Azure ATP, the Windows Defender ATP, so on and so forth. We are working with partners to bring in their alerts to our software as well. So Palo Alto Networks, which is a firewall software, we're bringing their alerts into the Security Graph as well. And many of our partners are also consuming these sorts of alerts. We have the concept of security profiles. So security profiles take a snapshot of what things existed at the time that the alert was raised. What was the user that was involved? Which files were involved? What computer was involved? There are actions that you can take as a result of an alert. So this is go restrict access to OneDrive or something along those lines. And then the configurations that you can push down through Intune onto a mobile device as a result of a security alert. Sensitive data is protected. There are two main ways to access this. You can access it in app-only mode, which you can do with any aspect of Graph. And then you can also access this through App Plus User mode. When you're in App Plus User mode, we expect that the user will be inside the security reader or security administrator roles. So these are common roles that are used for managing security alerts within Microsoft. Some of the things that you can do with this, you can build a security dashboard. So I was talking earlier about how with resetting a password or something along those lines, you may not want your help desk actually managing all that stuff through the Azure portal. Again, what we're trying to do with Microsoft Graph is give you the ability to build custom applications that do the same thing Microsoft offerings do, but they do it in your way, right? So if you want a restricted access for help desk operators that can see these security alerts, then you can go build your own portal around these sorts of things. You can build workflows around these sorts of things. So if you see that a particular type of security alert is happening, then you can take some sort of automatic remediation if that's appropriate for your business. So one of the main APIs that exists today is the Security Alerts API. Rather than looking at this slide, let's just go ahead and look at it in Graph Explorer. So Graph Explorer is a really good tool for accessing Graph. Most people that have used Graph in any way know about it, but you can get to it at aka.ms/ge. Just a request tool. You can see that I have put in the URL /beta/security/alerts. The security API is in beta at this point in time. The response that you get back from that is a collection of security alerts. Shoot, let me try zooming somewhere else. And you can see that in this particular case, the first one is sign in from an unfamiliar location. If you remember, Jan was talking about the different types of things that can happen. This sort of thing is going to actually affect a user's risk score. But this is not the only type of event that we might see. We could see all sorts of different things, ranging from viruses that are popping up on computers to files that are at risk to users that are at risk. There's lots of different alerts available. Again, you can try it today in Graph Explorer by just using WAC beta, WAC security, WAC alerts. Let me see if I can get that URL back here. WAC beta, WAC security, WAC alerts. Oh boy. See if I can get back into my slideshow here. Okay, some of the things that are coming still, Some of the things that are coming still are security profiles. Again, I mentioned that these are the snapshots of things that happened when the alert was raised. You will be able to access that in the future by just going to WAC security, WAC file security profiles, or something along those lines. You can take actions. In this particular case, the sample action is to restrict access to OneDrive. Again, you may use this to construct some sort of a workflow that says, when I see that a user has passed a particular risk score, then I don't trust them anymore, and I want to take automatic action against them. And finally, configurations allows you to work with the Intune configurations to push those down to mobile devices that may be at risk. So the roadmap for this API is that we've got stuff available in public preview now. They are working very hard to bring that stuff to GA in the later half of this particular year. So sometime in late 2018, we should see a lot of those things GA. You can still kick the tires while it's in public preview. It's a good thing to go out and explore. AKAMS Graph Security API is a good URL to go access to load up their web page. That will, I'm not going to load it, but you can go load up AKAMS Graph Security API, and that's their main documentation portal. So let's take a look at spatial analytics. And in this particular case, spatial analytics is coming out of the mixed reality team. It does have to do with perception. So it's kind of hard to figure out exactly how it might play together. But the Windows Mixed Reality team does all sorts of things. It's as much about computers perceiving things as it is about users perceiving things. And so you can imagine a variety of different experiences where that sort of information flowing in from IoT devices is meaningful. So we'll dive into some specific scenarios, but the canonical use case that they gave me initially was, imagine that you are operating a restaurant, and you're concerned about the table turnover time. So there are lots of things that affect table turnover time. The beats per minute of the music that's playing actually affects table turnover time. If you play faster music, then people tend to eat faster and leave their table faster. The temperature in the restaurant can affect these sorts of things. All sorts of different interesting scenarios can be used through spatial analytics. And so they have a particular video that we'll take a look at here. Which we can't hear.
At ThyssenKrupp Aerospace, we partner with the world's leading aerospace companies to simplify their supply chain management. We have a complex flow of materials in our factory to keep production running smoothly.
Our top priority is keeping people safe and making sure they have access to all the tools and information they need to make better decisions quickly.
Microsoft's mixed reality tools are helping us get there. As we take on new projects, we need to optimize our workflows. With Microsoft Layout, we're able to make design changes in our actual factory space with 3D holograms.
Once we have an optimized workflow, we use spatial analytics to help drive quality improvements. We're running 24/7 on most saws, so it's expensive to take one offline. Spatial analytics listens to our machines and helps to tell us the right time to replace a saw blade, balancing quality with the bottom line. One of the most stressful things in our business is when a customer calls to tell us they have a grounded plane waiting for a part. We have to drop everything and get that part out so the plane can get flying again. We need to move fast since it affects all of the other orders in our pipeline.
Cortana, what 14-foot saws are available?
Cell 14D is available.
Cortana, tell planning that I'm moving to cell 14D.
Integration with Teams and Cortana allows our workers to make quick, in-context decisions that speed up production. No matter how fast we're moving, we need to deliver the highest quality products every single time. When we finish an order, it's important to document the condition it was shipped in.
Spatial analytics helps us with the quality assurance process. We can store time-stamped information and photos about our work orders for future reference. With Microsoft's mixed reality tools, we're able to work faster, safer, and at a higher quality than ever before. We can't wait to scale this across our entire organization. There's so much possibility.
So one of the things that the spatial analytics team is doing is they're trying to solve the problem of having all these different assets out there. So you have your actual IoT device sitting somewhere. You've got Azure sitting somewhere with IoT Hub. You've got applications that you can build around that sort of thing, and then you've got customer problems that you're trying to solve. But trying to piece all these things together is really difficult for developers. And so spatial analytics specifically is trying to pivot this such that they can provide an end-to-end solution, at least for some of these super common use cases. And again, like you saw in the video there, that they were using that sound detection, and actually you saw the guy tap the button to indicate that something was happening. These sorts of things are so common that there's no excuse for us not to provide you guys a really good end-to-end solution for dealing with this sort of information. I'm going to skip over the taxonomy stuff here for the sake of time, and I want to talk instead about some of the different scenarios that spatial analytics is enabling. Actually, let me jump to this slide. Maybe. So what we have today is IoT Edge running on IoT devices. So again, spatial analytics currently has support for 3 types of devices. They have support for temperature sensors, for audio sensors, and for these push-button sensors. They'll obviously be adding other sensors as time goes by, but these are the places where they're starting because they enable interesting insights. Those sensors are going to be sending information up to IoT Hub using MQTT, which is pretty standard, right? Like all this stuff works today. What spatial analytics is doing that is unique is they are introducing this idea of alerts and insights. So if you know that the average temperature in such and such a location is X amount, and you see a big deviation from that, that may be a reason to go check out what is happening. Or conversely, if you know that your restaurant should be quiet at night, and there happens to be loud sound sustained for a couple minutes or something along those lines, maybe that's something that you need to go check out. In the US, we seem to have a problem with gun violence, right? And this is a sad reality of living in the US, and our students are living afraid. I have many kids in the school system. They literally do lockdown drills where they have to go hide in particular rooms. But imagine if we could deploy these sound sensors and have something automatically configured to recognize, hey, that sounds like a gunshot, and they're going to notify the authorities immediately. The reality is that right now we wait for humans to report that sort of incident, and meanwhile, lives are lost. So there's all sorts of different scenarios that we can solve, even with these 3 simple IoT devices. So again, there's all sorts of workflows that you may build around these sorts of things. The thing that ties it all together is the Microsoft Graph API. So really 3 things that we're working on right now, things that you can hear, things that you can see, things that you can touch. There's all sorts of different scenarios that you can light up around that, and there's some examples here with sentiment analysis and so on and so forth. They have many different value props that they can provide through building an intelligent warehouse to the manufacturing industry to retail. Again, I will leave that to you guys to review with the slide deck later. So I want to move on from built-in insights, which is something that we will continue to add to, but it's only so scalable because Microsoft has a certain number of resources. We have our own set of priorities. Those priorities are largely customer-driven, but they may not always align with your priorities. So we will continue to build insights into Microsoft Graph. But the second type of data that you can add is this first-class partnership idea. And I mentioned this managed access thing previously. The internal project name for this was Project Euclid. Right now it's being called Managed Access to O365 Data in Microsoft Azure, or some terrible, terrible name. I hope that they will come up with a real name for this product, but for right now, we're going to call it Managed Access. We saw a slide previously that looked like this one. Realistically, the best way to think about this managed access thing is a very high bandwidth pipe that allows you to copy terabytes or more worth of data in seconds from your Microsoft 365 subscription to Azure. Now, this is staying within your data boundaries, so it's all protected, right? So it lives within the customer's data boundary. Under the covers, it's going to use Azure Data Factory to copy this data across. And so maybe you copy that data across into Azure Data Lake and you're using an Azure Web Service over the top of it to provide some sort of insight. Or maybe you don't like Azure Data Lake and so you're going to use Azure SQL Data Warehouse instead. Or maybe you don't like Azure Web Services and so you're going to use Azure Container Instances instead. Or maybe you don't like that and you want to use different combinations. Doesn't really matter. The point is that once you get this data into Azure, you can use any one of the Azure resources to operate over that sort of data. And so we have really interesting partners that are actually building things on top of this today. One of the things that we have built is the Workplace Analytics. And if you're not familiar with this, Workplace Analytics tells you about your work week and how you tend to do your work. So if I go over to Megan's email, for instance, one of the things that I can see is, how many hours was she on email? 0 hours in this particular case, because she's fictional. She doesn't actually exist. How many hours of meetings did she have? 12 hours. And you, like, in a real tenant, you'll see things like, how many hours did you work outside of your normal office hours? How many meetings did you email during? There's all sorts of different information that's available. And we do this by using managed access under the covers. A different example, and I don't think I have this loaded anymore, but give me 1 second here. Demo.collage. So a partner of ours, Harmony, is building this type of experience around your workplace. And so what they do is they allow you to log into their tool, and they have insight into your calendar and your emails and your documents and all sorts of different data. And they're going to bring that together in a different way to allow you to be more productive. And so, for instance, I can click on this, Paris tour summer 2018, and I can see that they've found 7 emails related to that, 3 events, 20 docs, and I can look at everything together. So if I open up the emails, then I can see that there's different emails that are available here, and I can see that they were categorized as, ads and promotions and registrations. And so they're actually operating over tons of data at scale to bring together this sort of experience. You may want to bring together some other experience. Doesn't really matter. The point is that you can get access to all this sort of information and bring it across into your Azure tenant so you can build your own intelligence solution. Now again, this is done using protected boundaries that we know and trust. It is theoretically possible for you to take that information outside of, sorry, let me relaunch my presentation here. It is technically possible for you to take that information outside of the Azure data boundary. Obviously, we don't recommend that. We can protect the data if it lives inside, a Microsoft boundary somewhere. But the point is that you have now moved this data in volume to some other place. You can do this with really, really granular security controls. So I can specify that the data only gets moved for these users. If you want to protect your CEO's emails and make sure that they're not rendered in that sort of experience that we just looked at, you can do that. It's not easy to do that in other ways, right? You have to build that sort of intelligence separately. But this managed access product will give you really granular controls over what gets migrated. If you want to migrate just the subjects of the emails, you can do that sort of thing. Let's go through the animation here again. So all sorts of different insights that you can unlock using this sort of tooling. Again, there's lots of information in here. I stole these slides from one of the build presentations. I will let you guys go through this in your time. Let me skip forward here. This product is currently in private preview. If you want access to the private preview, you can go to AKAMS O365 Analytics Preview. That will take you to a form that you can fill out. We're currently evaluating partners based upon their scenario and so on and so forth. So it'll just ask you some basic questions. You can also reach out to Abram Jackson, whose Twitter handle is here, or you can reach out to O365 Analytics at Microsoft.com, all of which will give you more information about this particular product. We talked a little bit about Power Apps previously. Again, this is a different way to bring custom intelligence to bear. So if you are to use Power BI instead of Power Apps, for instance, to hook up to Microsoft Graph, then you can build all sorts of intelligence inside of Power BI. I'm not going to touch on it much beyond that, but the point is that there's lots of first-class offerings that we have that you can use to build intelligence strategies as well. And then finally, you can choose to bring your own intelligence strategies. And I think this is perhaps the most interesting aspect of things, because as much horsepower as we throw at building intelligence solutions on top of Microsoft Graph, we're never going to handle all the niche situations. And so there's many times when you will want to bring your own intelligence to Microsoft Graph. This afternoon, I'm actually going to be running a lab that's going to combine Microsoft Graph and cognitive services. I'm going to give you guys an overview of what we're going to look at in that particular lab, and hopefully we'll look at one last demo with it. But if you want to come back to that lab, you can get some hands-on experience walking through this sort of thing. In this case, I happen to be using 2 Microsoft products, but it doesn't matter, right? I could use something other than cognitive services to do this. I just happened to use cognitive services because it had easy functionality to do what I wanted to do. What is it that I wanted to do? We talk a lot at Microsoft about inclusion and diversity. And this is one of the things that I try to champion. Philip K. Dick has this amazing quote: "There exists for everyone a sentence, a series of words that has the power to destroy you. Another sentence exists, another series of words that could heal you." It's really easy for us to get into our daily lives and type out an email really quickly and not realize that we're not using inclusive language. So it's easy to start an email, at least in English, with "Hi guys," instead of saying "Hi team" or "Hi all." And there's lots of different silly mistakes that we can make. I actually have this particular slide that we'll build out in a second here, but when I first built this slide, I actually used an emoji that was the "I love you" hand, or the rock and roll hand, right? And somebody pointed out behind the scenes that sometimes hand gestures are interpreted differently in different places in the world. And so oftentimes we're non-inclusive without actually intending to be. So the lab that we're going to build is actually oriented around how do I look at outgoing emails and closing that particular feedback loop. So this is Jim. Jim has an idea. Jim's not a real person, but Jim does send an email. Doesn't really matter how that email is sent. It could be sent through the Outlook mail client, could be sent through the web client, could be sent through some other program entirely. The point is that Microsoft Graph will see that email. It will trigger a webhook in the lab that we're going to build, and that webhook is going to fire down to an Azure function. The Azure function is just a convenient way to receive the webhook, because receiving a webhook, you have to have an HTTPS endpoint set up, and Azure Functions gives you one out of the box. So the Azure function in this particular case is going to pull down the body of the email, and it's going to send the body of that email up to cognitive services. One of the cognitive services is called Content Moderator, and one of the Content Moderator offerings is the ability to evaluate text against a list of terms. So you can supply a custom term list. So Content Moderator is going to look at the words in my email, and it's going to compare it against that list. If the content is inclusive, awesome. This, by the way, was the rock and roll hand. Now it's the dancing guy. If the content's not inclusive, then we want to send an email back to Jim. Now, I want to stress that even though this is a fictional scenario, still it is a closed loop, right? This is an email from Jim to Jim, doesn't get sent to Jim's manager or anything like that, and again, fictional scenario. Hopefully, Jim learns, and the end result is still awesome. So again, we're going to kind of build this scenario out, but let me just show you really quickly what it looks like. Let me clean up my browser here. I'm logged in as Megan right now, not Jim. But you can see an example of one of the responses that we'll get. We'll go ahead and send it out here in just a second, but just in case the demo fails, oops, let me zoom because you guys can't read that. So she gets an email back that says, hey, next time instead of using the word guys, try team or all instead. So what's going to happen here is we're actually going to spin up a new email. We're going to send it out to Patty. And we're going to say, hey, there's a party. We're going to say, hi, guys. And this is set up to handle a couple different terms right now, but the rest of the email doesn't really matter. Guys will trigger the bad route. So we're going to send this off. What's happening in the background is that email is literally getting dispatched through Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is going to trigger the webhook out to the Azure function. The Azure function is sitting right here. We could actually go look at the log if we wanted to, but I have the Azure function that's running. The Azure function, again, is going to grab the body of the email. It's going to send it up to content moderator, get a response back, and then send back an email if the language was not inclusive. And so we can see, 8:42 p.m., which corresponds to 11:43 a.m. This email just came in, and we got back the right response. So again, we'll be building this out in the lab this afternoon, piecing together different pieces to make this full end-to-end solution. Jumping back into our deck. Great. Okay, and then in the future, again, we'll be lighting up different connections using the Open API description, which we already talked about, but then you can use that to connect up to other scenarios. So if you want to use something that's third party and you don't want to put a lot of work into it, hopefully, if they can accept OpenAPI 3, then that allows you to connect very easily to that other intelligence strategy. So, there's probably a million different scenarios where you can imagine building your own intelligence on top of Microsoft Graph. So we do fully support you bringing your own intelligence to it. So just recapping, 3 primary intelligence strategies. Number 1, use the built-in insights like security or spatial analytics or people or insights. Number 2, use the first-class partnerships that we're building, like the managed access or the PowerStack connections or Cortana. And number 3, you can choose to bring your own intelligence, and you can just use webhooks or something else to build that intelligence on top of Microsoft Graph. So next steps, try Graph Explorer, aka AMS-GE. It's a really, really easy demo. I also have a series of exercises that I put together. I will type that up here in just a second, but I didn't put the URL in the slide, so I apologize for that. But I have some exercises that you can use to really get started very easily with Graph Explorer, but you can try it even on your mobile device, aka AMS-GE. There are lots of other graph talks and labs happening. There's 2 labs happening today. There's a couple talks happening throughout the next couple days. You can try some different creative ideas. This particular one is, you can find at akams/incl. That'll take you to a gist up on GitHub. It has most of the directions that are necessary for it. Now, I will note that there's a couple nuances to that. So if you want to try it and you can't figure it out, either come to the lab tonight where we'll be going through this, or just find me in the hallway somewhere and I'll talk you through what's not there yet. Finally, build awesome apps and hopefully go profit. So with that, I will give you guys a whole 5 minutes back for lunch early. I appreciate your attention and hope you'll try Graph today. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Stafford. 各位贵宾，接下来是午休时间。中午休息时间，请凭识别证于教室外领取午餐餐盒，您可于教室内用餐。我们非常欢迎各位贵宾给予回馈。每一天的课程结束后，您可利用识别证后方的连结填写问卷，将完成画面出示于大会。